2nd, 2017 to order. We're in the Village Hall courtroom. It's approximately 7:45 right now. Joel?
Thanks, Rich. In accordance with the provisions of Section 10:4-8D of the Open Public Meetings Act, the date, location, and time of the commencement of this meeting is reflected in a meeting notice, a copy of which schedule has been filed with the village manager and the village clerk, the Ridgewood News, the Record newspapers, and posted on the bulletin board in the entry lobby of the village municipal offices at 131 North Maple Avenue, and on the village website, all in accordance with the provisions of the Open Public Meetings Act.
And thanks, Joel. Please stand for the flag salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Michael, roll call.
Mayor Knudsen. Here. Councilman Voigt.
Here.
Mr. Torrielli.
Here.
Ms. McWilliams.
Here.
Mr. Schreibner.
Here.
Mr. Joel.
Here.
Ms. Altano.
Here.
Ms. Patiri. Here. Ms. Giordano. Ms. Bartow.
Here.
Okay, thanks, Michael. All right, the first agenda item is public comments on topics not pending before the board. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to make a comment? Okay, seeing there's none, we'll move on to the next item. Committee, commission, and professional updates for non-agenda topics. Do I have any to my right? Any to my left? Seeing there none, the next item is correspondence received by the board. Michael, have we received any?
Yes, we received a traffic report from Petrie Traffic and also an email from Mr. Rook Halliday regarding a comparison of a multifamily development in Melrose, Massachusetts, to what the board is now hearing, the current multifamily housing, and they are, in favor of it.
Okay, the next item is 240 Associates, preliminary and final major site plan, 150 through 174 Chestnut Street, Block 2005, Lot 38. Adoption of memorializing resolution of approval. This is to be carried to May 16, 2017 with the consent of the applicant. Mr. Wells, is that correct? Okay, thank you, Mr. Wells. We'll move on to our next item. It'll be the Ridgewood Dayton preliminary and final major site plan, 152 South Broad Street, blocks 3707, 3905, lots 5.01/1.01. This is a public hearing continued from April 4, 2017. And Mr. Wells, you have the floor.
Yeah, if we could just have 1 second to set up a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
That didn't help.
Yeah. Didn't sound good.
Got worse. My best story ever on messing up the file was leaving it on top of the car and driving. It's a little windy tonight. Okay, for the record, my name is Thomas Wells, the law firm of Wells, Jaworski, and Liebman, and I'm back here in front of you on the Ridgewood Dayton project, which is at block 3905, lot 101, and block 3707, lot 5.01. In a way of reminder, we began this process, the most recent process, in last June, June of 2016, and then we had our first hearing in September, on September 6th. Then we were back in front of you on September 20th, back here on February 7th, and now we're here tonight on May 2nd. I'm going to ask my colleague, Mr. Cohen, to give you the exhibit list, which you may recollect that I started keeping a while ago, and have updated it to include 4 exhibits that we intend to introduce tonight and the exhibits that we introduced prior to this evening. I also took the liberty, as I have in the past, of numbering and listing board exhibits. It's possible that the board may not want to use all those exhibits, but it seemed to me to keep us well organized, I've gone ahead and done that and added most recently Ms. McManus's report, which was received on March 3rd, or dated March 3rd, received a few days after that, and then Mr. Jar's report dated April 19th, both of which has been received by us, presumably by the board as well, and they are subsequent to our last hearing. So I'm giving you this exhibit list so you can see, get us organized a little bit. As I did with the other application, which I am the counsel, I took advantage of the fact that we have order transcripts. Beth is back, in case anybody didn't notice. Her sister's been doing good coverage while she was out and injured a little bit. But through having transcripts, it was easier for us than listening to the CDs. Not that it's not fun to listen to the CDs, but we went back through and wanted to present to the board kind of a little bit of a summary, not of the whole thing. When we get to the point where I do a little bit of closing, I can do that. But I did want to remind you, because as is always the case in these matters, especially when they have some complexity, and some people who don't necessarily agree with what we're doing, matters get stipulated into the record. So I've summarized both the stipulations that I believe have been made primarily by me, in a couple cases by witnesses, through this evening, and then I have some more that I want to discuss this evening. So the second exhibit that is included in the package that Andy just gave you, which we're going to number, if we could, A18, which is stipulations previously agreed to. I'll just summarize that real quickly. You will recollect that when, you may not recollect, but when we first presented this application, we actually had 2 variances. I described them as de minimis. One is the variance that still exists and is still de minimis. It has to do with the steep slope disturbance. The other one was that the back of the retaining wall facing the railroad tracks, as we originally proposed it, was unfinished, essentially was block. And Mr. Branchow was the planner at that time, called that out as a variance. The applicant simply stipulated that we'll put stucco on it, so the trains going by will see stucco. So that variance disappeared, but that was the very first stipulation on September 6th that we would put stucco on that wall. Number 2, there's stacked parking, or tandem parking is sometimes referred to, and we made clear that in all cases, when tandem parking spaces were used, that they would be assigned to people with a single unit. There actually will be a little bit more testimony on that this evening, but we stipulated that on September 6th. Also, that the units dedicated for affordable housing would not be clustered. You've heard some discussion from time to time about why it's not necessarily a good idea to go over affordable units in one place, and we've indicated that we certainly would be doing that, so that was a stipulation as well. Number 4, we stipulated that we would certainly meet all state noise level requirements with regard to the equipment. Number 5, the applicant will meet the screening requirements for the equipment that we stipulated on September 6th. On September 20th, there had been some concern expressed, I believe, by Mayor Knudsen with respect to the elevator, and the client made, at that point indicated that we stipulated that we would add a 3rd elevator to the project. So that was a stipulation that went into the record. Number 7, there was some questions about the standpipes. So we provided that additional standpipes near the building, if required by the Ridgewood Fire Department, would be added. And that's something we'll probably work out with your engineer as we go forward, but we so stipulated. Number 8 was the applicant will truck snow from the property in the event of large snowstorms. We explained that that's what would happen, because this site, like so many sites, don't really have areas in which large amounts of snow can be collected, so that's the off-site when that happens. Number 9, the applicant will provide adequate shielding for streetlights. That was in response to a concern raised, I don't remember by who. I believe it was a concern raised by your engineer with respect to Title 39, which has to do with parking enforcement, and we stipulated that we did not request Title 39 enforcement. Number 11, applicant will provide additional do not enter signs as recommended by building professionals. Whatever they require, we'll certainly do. Number 12, there was an issue with respect to the water main, and we're not exactly clear on where that stands. Certainly with your engineer and the water department, but we agreed to, if needed, to replace the water main in front of the property. So those are things that were covered in the 3 hearings that we've had so far. At the very last hearing, you will recollect that, well, maybe you'll recollect, it's been a little while, Mr. DeSario was testifying as our traffic engineer. He had completed most of his testimony, but had not started on parking, which is the smaller part of his testimony as a traffic engineer. And then Mr. Jar, on behalf of the village, has started to ask him some questions and deteriorated a little bit. And at that point, we called it a night. Since that time, and actually it was suggested by the board and certainly agreed by us that we would encourage Mr. DeSario and Mr. Jar to meet, not necessarily with us all present while they're meeting, and to talk about any concerns they had. Mr. Jar produced the report that I marked, right?
BD6?
Yes, exactly right. BD6, and made specific recommendations with respect to various traffic and pedestrian improvements that he believes should be made. I'll spare the arguments as to why we don't exactly have to make them, but we would like to make them. So, as a result of Mr. Jar's report, I'm going to stipulate that the applicant will indeed construct a sidewalk along the frontage of their project. Number 2, will stripe and or restripe crosswalks in front of the project frontage, but they will also stripe and provide appropriate ADA facilities at all intersections along South Broad Street from Hudson Street to Brainerd Place. Third, the applicant will, if requested, mill and pave the full width of South Broad Street on the entire frontage. In other words, just replace the whole street. Number 4, the applicant will provide decorative lighting directly adjacent to its development, which is consistent with the lighting found along South Broad Street and elsewhere in the village. And last, we'd agree to cooperate with village professionals should they later on decide to assess the effects of pedestrian connectivity and traffic impacts after our development is completed. So those are all new stipulations that I'll put into the record this evening, directly responding to the various requests that Mr. Jar made, and I believe we've quite frankly agreed to everything that he asked for. As I said, Mr. DeSario will be back this evening in just a minute, so if you have more specific questions about that, those can certainly be asked. Last, Ms. McManus has come on board as your planner since we began the application. Obviously, Mr. Branchow began the process. She produced a new report, which was dated March 30th. Unlike the other report that I spoke to the board on, it was not nearly as laden with comments that we found difficult to deal with so late in the process. However, there were some comments made, and in most cases here as well, I'm going to refer the board and Ms. McManus to previous testimony, which obviously she wasn't able to attend here, but with respect to the architectural screening for the parking, Mr. Appel did testify on that we believe we've appropriately screened it, and I've given the reference to where he testified and where that can be found in the transcript. The amenity deck is shown on the architectural plans. It is not terribly clear, so I'm stating right here that access is obtained from the first floor where it's actually shown on the plan, but that's where the access is from. Number 3, the applicant had previously stipulated, and I didn't list it in my previous list because it comes up here, that in response to, I think, Mr. Branchow's comments, that the trees at the front of the property would not be fruit-bearing nor flowering. He was concerned about that. The new planner, Ms. McManus, has indicated that she's concerned specifically that the yew species could be a problem with respect to poisonous berries, and that the dwarf, concerned about the dwarfed winged anonymous, whatever that is. I believe it's planners and landscape architects as to what that is. In any event, what we're simply going to do is stipulate that we'll be happy to work with village professionals with respect to the actual species that's chosen. We're all looking for things that are attractive and certainly safe for residents of the project and anybody who might come by. There was a dormer suggestion with respect to the architecture, and here too there was specific testimony by Mr. Appel on September 6th during his extensive testimony, which I'm referring more to. And then last, there was testimony with respect to the noise mitigation by Mr. Appel on September 6th. And I did indicate here, Mr. Loventhal is going to be my very last witness, and if there's further questions about noise mitigation, he perhaps can answer them. So what do we intend to do this evening? I'm going to bring Mr. DeSario back up. He is basically done with his testimony with respect to traffic in terms of his direct. And it's possible, obviously, that the board or others could have questions and that he'd be available for that. As I said, we've responded to Mr. Jar's comments since that time. I will specifically ask him to discuss the issue of parking because he had not done that. We bifurcated that. So he'll finish that. He'll be open for your questions, and that would hopefully conclude our expert witnesses. During the course of this hearing and prior to this hearing during the master plan process, board members have had a chance to meet or at least see in the audience some 50 times Mr. Scott Loventhal, who's the principal with Garden Homes that's responsible for this project. And because he is particularly knowledgeable and hands-on about this project, I'm going to bring him as a witness as well, not as an expert witness, although he is an attorney and a long-time developer and certainly has expertise, but to simply answer any operational questions that you have. And you will note, although I didn't bring him back up now because he has the list, during the course of the other hearings we've had on this, the other 3 nights, from time to time, I would say, Mr. Loventhal could probably answer that better. So he is going to attempt, wherever I had said that before, to answer it better. But his testimony will be fairly brief, basically to cover any open items that are here. And he is available, as are other witnesses, for any questions that you might have. And that will conclude what we intend to do in terms of expert testimony, and then Mr. Loventhal, and we'll be prepared to answer any questions and close our case. So that said, in the way of introduction, any questions of me? Oh, I have one other thing I wanted to mention. I shouldn't. I'll give some credit to your attorney with my last exhibit. There's a 2-page legal opinion from me, basically speaking to the board about what I believe is the appropriate legal review standard in this matter, in fact, any matter before the planning board, for, in particular, something where the zoning is within the code and the site plan is basically conforming. But rather than wax eloquent again or put more lawyer time into it, the memorandum that Mr. Martin and his office prepared that was submitted in the earlier application was a very extensive and very well-written primer on this very subject. As I say in my cover letter, although it is specifically related or titled as to do with the Chestnut Village, that's virtually the only place where Chestnut Village is mentioned, and it virtually is a primer that I recommend to this board. Therefore, I've attached it to my letter, and I would like to enter it into this record as my last exhibit, which is, I believe, a 21, which would form our basic thoughts to you in terms of a legal standard of review. Now, I'll speak more on that when I do summation, but I wanted you to have that material in front of you. Okay, any questions?
Mr. Wells, thank you for that. As to the last exhibit, I'll probably get a little bit more specific on certain instances with regard to this application, but thank you.
No, and I understand that you may well do that as well, but it was so stellar, I may be using it outside of the village of Ridgewood, I decided I'm not going to rewrite it. It's already written well for the board, so...
no copyright on that.
As you know, us attorneys, we don't get really to copyright things. I've even read briefs where I read, boy, that sounds good, and I think, I wrote that. It comes back. Okay. Should I call Mr. DeSario?
Did anyone have any questions? Okay. Councilman Boyd?
Yeah, I do. As it relates to one of the stipulations, Chris, you published a memo September 6, 2016, on review of submitted materials, and one of the comments you made was the age of the sanitary sewer collection system and examining the flow volumes and peak times, and particularly under wet weather conditions. As a stipulation, I mean, if that needs to be upgraded, is that something that we should have as a stipulation, that it's evaluated and, if need be, upgraded, that the developer would pay for that?
I'm not going to get into what the developer's contribution would be, but I would recommend a condition of approval be that an examination would be made of the receiving sanitary sewer line to confirm that there is adequate capacity for the anticipated flow from this project. And that would be from South Broad, and I think this sewer line runs down towards East Ridgewood and heads east on East Ridgewood Avenue.
So you could do that at the site, is that correct? I mean, as far as the flow, looking at this?
It would be something I have to do with the applicant's engineers.
Okay.
They may, with another application that the board has heard, do some readings and analysis of the current flow in the line to determine what that is, and then we would look at what their anticipated calculated flow is to make sure everything would fit adequately.
Yeah, and then you also mentioned under wet weather conditions. I'm assuming that's kind of probably the extreme condition where
wet weather conditions would be more of a worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Particularly for our system because it is relatively porous.
Mm-hmm.
Our flow volumes do increase significantly during significant rain events.
Okay.
So we still have to, in fairness to the applicant, make sure that their waste products do get conveyed to our treatment plant.
Yeah. So can we add that as a stipulation that that would happen?
First I'll comment, and I have never appeared in any town where the rain didn't infiltrate the system. So that wet weather conditions, we certainly understand. And yes, we'll stipulate to work with the engineer on that.
Good, thank you.
Anything else, Jeff? Is that it? Okay. Does anyone else have any questions before Tom?
Actually, it's funny because, Jeff, I was going to ask the same question I asked Melanie. Is it something, if everyone got up and took a shower at the same time, do we have the capacity to bring water to that site? I know he's talking about waste, but I actually asked Melanie if we had ever talked about that in a meeting before, if everyone were going to shower at the same time.
Are you interested in the potable supply, or,
Yes.
as far as I understand from what Ridgewood Water has provided, I think they have provided, Mr. Wells can confirm, a will serve letter?
They did.
They did. So that
That's part of the record, it's one of your
Okay.
Yes, that means Ridgewood Water is comfortable in providing the water needs for what is proposed. From the wastewater end, designers have what is known as peaking factors, and that's what we use to anticipate the flow. And that is what I would do with the applicant's engineers to confirm the conveyance means had the capacity to bring the waste to our plant. Our treatment plant, as I believe I mentioned in my memo, has adequate capacity for any increase proposed by this development.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Wells, these stipulation sheets get addicting. Where would you like, they get addicting, they're very good. Where would you like to add that last one that Mr. Boyd and Chris just went over? I just want to put it down, so.
Oh, yeah, I would suggest that just...
Previously agreed,
well, that would be a new one. You can add it on the sheet if you'd like, on the first of the sheets. Where stipulations previously agreed by the applicant, you can certainly make it 13 on that, but it's really going to be reflected in this evening's, so anything that happens tonight is sort of new, but, yeah, that's fine. Ultimately, this preparing stipulations, as I did, is really to help the board remember what I promised, because so much time has gone by, but also, quite frankly, to assist your office because they ultimately have to find their way into the approval resolution, and that's sort of the governing document, not what we present here. So it's really to assist more than rarely do you go back to the actual record in enforcing things. It's the resolution that...
You saw where I was going.
I do have one more question, I'm sorry. Sure. If that's okay. Mr. Wells, you talked about, I just want to make sure I understand what this means, milling and paving the full width of Broad Street along the entire frontage. Help me understand what that means from an entire, I mean, is it the whole length of the property, or?
The length of the property, completely replace the street.
All right.
Milling and paving, your engineer can help tell you better, but essentially you grind it up and you put new, Chris helped me.
Yes, we generally like mill to resurface with 2 inches of fresh top mix.
Yeah.
For example, we just did that on Heights Road from West Glen north 3-4 blocks.
Yeah, so Chris, just to add on to that, I mean, we're going to have this nice section of road, and then on the other sides of it, I'm assuming is that going to be redone as well?
It would be our intention. Okay. Our intention may be working, if this is approved and this goes forward as just presented, we would like to work with the applicant that once they're done, that any village program on South Broad Street, they would probably pay their portion of the work in front of their site, as Mr. Wells just agreed, and it would be done by the village's contractor. Okay. That may be easier for all parties.
Yeah, and then it obviously, probably be done at the same time, so that's not going to... Yeah, okay.
I mean, it would, just milling out that short section would be a cumbersome task.
Yep.
It's a lot easier to do it if we resurface the entire South Broad from East Ridgewood Avenue down to past Brainerd, certainly.
Okay.
Because that whole section...
Everybody would be pleased with, so that it was certainly work to see if that could be accomplished.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
The machines would be there and everything would already be set up by the developer, that you just keep going.
Yeah, or again, our paving contractor would be set up, and whatever tonnage and effort was expended in agreement with them, they would reimburse the village.
More typically, it would be the village's contractor, and we would reimburse that cost. That would be the more typical way than the other way around. So,
yeah, I mean, the village has put in South Broad Street for a New Jersey Department of Transportation municipal aid grant for 2016, but unfortunately 2016 was the year that the state had no money. So that grant got denied. We may reapply, and then that would help offset the village's costs for the work along South Broad.
Okay. All right. No further questions? All right. Mr. Wells.
Okay. Recall Mr. DeSerio.
Good evening, Mr. DeSerio. You remain sworn and qualified, okay?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. DeSerio, I told the board that what was left of your testimony was to discuss the parking. So if you would, tell us about the parking. What's proposed?
Certainly. As the board's aware, a total supply of 187 parking spaces are proposed. That exceeds the requirement of 183 parking spaces as set forth by the residential site improvement standards. So we exceed the requirement by 4 parking spaces. That parking supply consists of what I'll call standard spaces, as well as the term that you heard Mr. Wells refer to, tandem parking spaces. So a tandem parking space, you can liken it to a single-family home, where you have a garage space, and then you have a driveway in front of the garage space that could accommodate another vehicle. So those 2 vehicles, one in the garage and one in the driveway, would be tandem to each other. Now, the question always inevitably arises as to how you manage the use of the tandem parking spaces, because obviously if somebody's parked in the first space of a tandem parking space, and you have another vehicle in the second space of the tandem parking space, how does the first vehicle get out? Well, it's simple. Those tandem spaces will be assigned to a specific unit within the building. So each tandem space or stall, so there's 2 parking spaces, will be assigned to a single unit. I refer you to, and I'm not sure in terms of the exhibit number, Tom, so I have my report, which was revised January 26th of this year, as Exhibit A14.
Yes.
Okay, so referring to Exhibit A14 in Table 5, there is a parking assignment summary, just to take you through how the parking that's proposed will be managed. And it's rather simple. So 79 units will be assigned one parking space for a total of 79 parking spaces. 19 units will be assigned 2 spaces, which are the tandem spaces. So 19 units will have a total of 38 parking spaces assigned to them, all of them tandem. That leaves a balance of 75 parking spaces. 22 of those remaining parking spaces may be assigned to a unit that desires to have an additional parking space beyond the one that they're already assigned. And the remaining 53 parking spaces will be unassigned. They'll be available to residents, visitors, and they will also consist of the accessible parking spaces that are proposed. So again, just in summary, 74 units will be assigned 1 space, 19 units will be assigned all of the tandem parking spaces, which equate to 38. There'll be 22 other spaces that could be assigned to another unit if they desire to have an additional parking space, and 53 spaces will be unassigned and available to visitors, residents, as well as the accessible parking spaces. I can tell you I've worked on a few projects where tandem parking was proposed and as part of the overall parking supply, and in my experience, there's never been an issue with respect to the use of tandem parking spaces. And it really largely comes down to a management situation in terms of how management assigns and monitors the use of the parking, not only tandem, but as well as the other spaces. And in my experience, there's never been an issue. I think when you hear from the applicant, when he comes up here shortly thereafter from me, he's going to echo that in terms of they have multiple projects with tandem parking, and their experience is consistent with mine. There's never been an issue with respect to the use of tandem in any of their projects. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I'm done with my questions of Mr. Cesaris.
Okay. Dave, do you have any questions for Mr. Desario? No. Councilman Boyd?
Had you finished drumming?
I know this was part of the last discussion. We're kind of, as Mr. Wells said, kind of degraded. I just need some help in understanding one of your tables that you of your August 24th, 2016 report, and it looked at the kind of the level of service and how it kind of increased dramatically with the inclusion of this particular development. And I need some understanding as to why those numbers deviate so dramatically from the existing conditions. And I was hoping you could kind of explain that to me. It's Table 4, and it relates to some of the north and southbound, the intersection at East Ridgewood Ave on South Broad. Would you be able to kind of go through that with me so I understand it a little bit better? Because my assumption is that if this is added, we're going to create a much worse situation than currently exists at that intersection. So,
Well, not to get too technical, but that intersection is a stop-controlled intersection. And the unsignalized intersection methodology that we use to evaluate how a stop-controlled intersection operates, when you get to a failing condition, and right now, and you're referring to Table 4, which is a weekday evening peak hour, you get a lot of traffic coming southbound on Broad, either trying to come through that intersection or making a left onto Ridgewood Avenue. So that particular approach is failing today. When you get to failure with this methodology, the delay calculation becomes, in my opinion, oversensitive to additional volume that's introduced into the intersection, such that any additional traffic, albeit very small additions of traffic, translate into a severe increase in calculated delay. But to quantify this for everyone, two things. We've assumed that all the traffic that we've estimated that this project will generate, that everyone is driving their car. When in reality, some people are going to walk to work, some people are going to walk to the train. Some people are going to walk to the downtown business district in the evening to go to dinner. So I think our estimates are conservative in that I think there will be less traffic generated by this development than we've estimated for the reasons I've stated. Aside from that conservative assumption, just to quantify what we're talking about as it relates to the intersection you've questioned, coming north on Broad, making a right turn onto Ridgewood, we're talking about one additional vehicle every 15 minutes on average. It's similar in terms of vehicles coming down Ridgewood making a left onto Broad. So the amount of additional traffic associated with this project, in my opinion, is not significant. Yes, in terms of applying the methodology, it equates to a large increase in delay. But I think when you take a step back and look at it practically, you're not going to be able to perceive a noticeable change in operations because the amount of additional vehicles through that intersection attributed to this project is not that high.
So why did you apply this methodology then if it makes it look so bad?
Because we, as traffic engineers, are prescribed to use this methodology to evaluate traffic conditions.
So these numbers are accurate?
When you get to a failure condition like we have for the southbound approach, I'm respectfully submitting to you that I think the delay associated with the methodology overestimates the delay. And it's super sensitive to increasing traffic volumes. You can increase it by one vehicle and you're going to see a dramatic increase in delay as calculated by the methodology. So it's flawed.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Mayor Knutson?
Did you say it's wrong?
Flawed.
Oh, flawed. Okay,
Flawed.
sorry. Okay. I had a question on the tandem parking. After our attorney answers his phone. So on the, I just want to get to the right location. What are the widths of the aisles in the parking lot?
They're all 24 feet.
Okay. And then how many of the tandem spaces are within a, I want to say, 40-foot proximity to an entrance or exit?
The entrance and exits that are proposed along Broad Street?
Within the parking area?
So, Mayor, I'm a little confused by your question, but let me just take you through the site plan. So, referring to Exhibit A11, we have a driveway on the northerly end of the site proposed to Broad.
Right.
That would be an in-only driveway. On the southerly end of the site, we have another driveway that's proposed to Broad. That would be an exit-only
No,
driveway.
I'm talking about the exit to the parking area. How many are within,
Well, we have a perimeter circulation aisle, which
Right.
is one way, and that circulation aisle connects from the enter driveway on Broad to the exit driveway on Broad. It's one-way circulation in a counterclockwise pattern. Along that circulation aisle that runs along the perimeter of the site, there's intersecting circulation aisles that take you into the majority of the parking that's proposed underneath the building. In terms of tandem parking being nearby, I guess these interior intersections is the question you're asking?
Yeah, I'm interested in knowing how many of the tandem spaces are actually within that proximity of the exiting or entering the parking area. Right. Oh, here.
My quick count is about 8.
So just in terms of tandem parking management, and the use of it kind of like a single-family house, a driveway is what you're expressing. But the difference in that scenario is that you don't have other vehicles insinuated into the area coming in and out of that. So doesn't that impact negatively to the flow of traffic exiting and entering?
Well, I'll give you two-part answer to that. I live in a single-family house. It's my wife, me, my daughter, and my son. Both of them have licenses now. It's no different than us parking. Let me back up. My wife's Italian. We have a 2-car garage. Only takes 1 car because we have to have the fridge and the freezer outside, taking up my spot that I would have normally parked my car in. So having said that, my wife gets the garage spot. My daughter and my son park on the driveway behind the garage spots, and Dad parks on the street because I'm usually the last one to come home because of hearings like this every night, which is fair. So when my wife wants to leave to go to her teaching position in the morning, and my daughter, who doesn't need to leave till later, is parked behind her, my daughter has to get in her car and pull out into the street where there's traffic along our street going up and down. Just like if you had, oh, this thing's not working now. There we go. Just like if you had tandem spots where this gray is, that's a circulation aisle coming in. It's no different than traffic that would be circulating up and down this aisle with tandem spaces here and somebody pulls out into that aisle. It's directly analogous to my situation in my house, but we're pulling out into a public street as opposed to an interior circulation, parking circulation aisle. The second part, to answer your question, is what you've asked is no different than the spots that are not tandem along these aisles, the spots that are just single spots. It's the same situation. Somebody pulling out from a single spot is confronted with the exact same amount of traffic, if you will, if there's anyone circulating in the two-way aisle pulling out from a single spot. So I think when you start to look at this in context, it's a 93-unit residential building. You're not going to see a lot of circulation occurring along these aisles at any particular time.
Okay. All right, I'm good.
Okay.
Just a quick follow-up question on that. The 24 feet, Dan, is that two-way traffic available?
Yes, that's standard parking design practice, 9 by 18 stalls, so 9 foot wide by 18 foot deep. That's what we're proposing, served by 24-foot wide aisles for two-way circulation. That's standard parking design.
I was going to ask you if that's circulation, but I think it's really done. The only question that I don't more than understand, you talked about the fact that it would be one way around the boat, two-way individual aisle, and one way around the boat.
Correct.
How wide would the access drive be around the building?
That was my next question.
Now, I was going to shoot from the hip and say 30 feet, because typically that's what it is, but in this instance, it's 31 feet. So there's a 31-foot wide circulation aisle around the perimeter of the site.
So my follow-up question on that, maybe board members may be curious, maybe not, but if perchance someone was stopped or disabled or whatever, for whatever reason, along that way, even though it's not two-way traffic, the one-way traffic would never be impeded by virtue of that.
No, and typically one-way circulation aisles, in terms of ordinance standards, range in widths from 12 to 15 feet. So effectively, we're proposing a one-way circulation aisle around the site that's twice as wide as typically required.
Francis, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions at this time.
Melanie?
How wide is the street currently, right there in front, Broad Street, where you're going to repave?
Chris, do you know? Probably around 28, 30, I'm supposed to about 30. We may not know that. Well, he's going to measure.
Sounds about right. I agree.
Yeah, it's got some on-street parking on it and two-way flow. It's going to be on the order of 30, probably a little wider.
And I mean, do you know if it's considered an arterial street or I mean, Chris might be better to answer this, but if I read correctly, and I might have a couple of numbers off, but I believe it's supposed to be widened once development is placed there to 50 feet, 50 or 60 feet, or 30 or 40, and then including the right-of-way, it would be?
I'll defer to your engineer.
Okay.
That could be a problem on South Broad Street, widening it just in front of the development, because the street is relatively consistent from East Ridgewood Avenue southward. If we were to make a wider section in front of this development, it could lead people to think that was like additional on-street parking. And I don't believe we are intending it to have on-street parking in front of this applicant.
No, is it no parking in front of there?
I believe there's no parking at
no
this time.
standing. And sidewalks, I think, are required to, once the development is put in, to be replaced on both sides of the street. I don't actually even know right off the top of my head if sidewalks, I think they're on the other side currently.
There are sidewalks on both sides of the street, and I think Mr. Jarr had made a pedestrian circulation plan with those recommendations.
I saw that.
And I believe Mr. Wells had stipulated they would agree to them.
To both of them, okay.
We're replacing the sidewalk on our side.
On their side.
The other side is fine as far as I can tell.
I didn't look at it. I'm just double checking a few different facts. But so if widening that street there to accommodate for a development of that size isn't really an option, I guess I'm just struggling with that for a moment, but if that's okay.
Well, let's just touch on it for a second. In my opinion, there's really no reason to widen Broad Street. When you get wider roadways, people drive faster. So I think to be in keeping with the context of the character of the area and the volumes that are going to be generated by this development at the driveways, there's more than sufficient width that exists today for those driveways to operate safely and efficiently.
Yeah, I'm definitely aware of all of that and concerned with the safety of the entire development. I'm trying to additionally, look ahead and to all of the other development being put in the area, and if we're adding more congestion. So if the idea is to minimize congestion by keeping the roadway wider, I understand. I certainly wouldn't. I think everybody knows I wouldn't want anything to be less safe.
Can I suggest this follows on what Chris said? The problem we have is if you think about the street starting at East Ridgewood Avenue and running all the way out, it would be very difficult to widen the entire street. And unless you were widening the entire street, it would actually make it less safe to widen it for one small section and then go back to thin again. So it really doesn't make any sense. In addition to the fact that we're creating only one car every 15 minutes, so it's not substantially increasing what's there.
And widening, I can tell you there's a lot of, now I'm not going to make any comparisons to the village because I know you're unique unto yourself, so I won't do that. But I can tell you there's other municipalities with very wide streets that are implementing what's called a road diet, where they're starting to narrow the streets down because they find it's better for pedestrians. So your wider streets have longer crosswalks. They require people to be in the travel way longer as they're making crossings. So really the trend, especially in areas such as what we're talking about, The trend is for narrower streets and really to return the right-of-way to pedestrians and bicyclists as opposed to vehicles.
Definitely heard of that and very familiar with it. My last question, I think maybe the mayor covered it already with the tandem parking. You don't foresee, I have concerns, I guess, about anybody needing to back out or move do the car swap when you have somebody coming and they have to wait. If somebody pulls up, say somebody comes up behind them as they're getting ready to do the car switch, you then have to have enough space and room for people to back in, back all the way out so somebody else can back out, pull out. It's two-way, right, where the tandem parking is, so somebody would only maybe have to do one lap around.
All the parking is served by two-way aisles, and we're not talking about a large parking lot. So if you get into your vehicle and you're not a tandem user, let's say, and you start to make your way out towards the one-way circulation aisle, you're going to be able to see all the way to the one-way circulation aisle. So if you see someone pulling out and they're in a tandem spot, you're probably going to get used to stopping far enough back to let them pull out and do the car swap.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Debbie?
Yeah, just a few things. I don't necessarily disagree with you on the wider streets means faster cars. I guess my question to you is, based on where the cars would be exiting the building and making a making a left-hand turn, there is on-street parking in front of the New York Sports Club, in front of the church and stuff is there. So if your average parking spot, I think you said was 9 feet wide, is that correct?
Not when it's parallel. So on-street parking, parallel parking against the
No, I
curb
just mean
is less.
in your parking garage, it was 9 feet wide was the parking spot?
Yes.
So this street is about 30 feet wide, right? So 3 cars on that street, because you've got two-way traffic and parking, let's just call it's 27 feet. And the street is 30 feet wide. Do you feel that's safe for 2 cars going this way with on-street parking?
Absolutely.
Okay. So you've never had a mirror knocked off your car, or that's never happened? It is a narrow street in that vicinity with the on-street parking there.
How wide is a parallel parking space
Typically, parallel parking space is anywhere from 6 to 8 feet wide.
The average
So it's
car?
not 9 feet
What's the
wide.
average car? So an
6
average...
feet.
6 feet wide? Okay, so if they park a foot from the curb, it's 7 feet. So, okay, so my question to you is...
But just remember, and I think we lose sight of this sometimes, this is not a greenfield site. There were businesses prior in use on this site. And right now, the site's being used for commuter parking, where you have cars coming in and out all day. So it's an active site with respect to turning maneuvers in and out of it, and to our knowledge, there's been no issue with respect to people turning in and out of the
I'm just looking at
site.
your proposed ingress and egress. So that's what I'm looking at right now, where you're proposing to come in and where you're proposing to exit the site. So it's not about, I'm not comparing to what it's being used today, or what the cars are, or their habits or routine. I'm just looking at where you have your ingress and egress, which obviously makes sense around the building. So I'm just looking at that, knowing how people live, quote unquote, on that street when they park in the morning, if they're going to the gym, if they're dropping kids off at church, what they're doing in that area. So that was my question. Do you feel that that's safe with that size road to have parking and two-way traffic?
Without question, yes.
That was my question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just one little question regarding your methodology in coming up with the right amount of parking spaces. And I'm sure it works because you've used it many times. But have you ever gone back to the project you already completed and actually seen if this works? If actually what you've done and what you have incorporated in your study worked out even better or worse?
Are you talking about specifically the tandem parking and how it operates, or the overall parking supply?
Well, basically the whole parking supply, relative to the site and how you come up, your methodology you were talking about before.
So what the requirement is set forth by state statute. So we're bound by that as well as the board in terms of a parking requirement. So we have no control over that. What I can tell you, though, is our parking supply equates to about 2 spaces per unit. It's 193 units are proposed. We have 187 parking spaces proposed. I can tell you I've done parking studies at other developments, rental, residential developments. The actual peak parking demands that we have found at other developments are lower than the parking supply that's proposed. So I anticipate that you're not going to see a peak parking demand approach the number of parking spaces that are proposed. But again, we're bound by state statute to provide that number of parking spaces, and that's what the applicant has proposed for that reason.
As long as you're confident that shouldn't be any problems.
With all due respect, I am extremely confident that the proposed parking supply is going to be more than adequate to accommodate the demands that this proposed project will generate.
Okay. And one more thing, as a funny segue to your refrigerator story. I'm Italian, I don't have a refrigerator in my garage, so get your spot back.
We have a fridge and a freezer. We don't have a second kitchen.
Oh, because I'm Italian.
Not American Italian.
That's
The Irish only have the one refrigerator and a freezer?
Thank you, Mr. Sarah.
You're welcome.
Joel, you have any questions?
I'm not going to discuss my freezer. No questions.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't have any questions either, so I guess,
Rich,
John?
I have one follow-up question.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. One of the areas in which your analogy doesn't work with the tandem parking is the fact that so many of these tandem places are so close to the wall that you can only back out in one direction.
Right, and they're at the end of the aisles, so you're not going to have anybody that's coming up towards you because you're at the end of the aisle.
The car that is backing out is in the way of the car that's going to follow it.
That's what I have.
Right, they would have
They're
to...
going to have to back out all the way out to another aisle in order to allow the first car to even get out. They're both going to have to back up that distance.
You're correct. The first car will have to back out and leave. They might have to go out to another parking aisle and then come back in. Or what's likely going to happen, I'll tell you what the likely scenario is. There's going to be empty parking spaces in the row or the aisle that they're going to do this maneuver in. So the vehicle that's in the back of the tandem will pull into one of the empty spaces. The one that's in the front of the tandem will pull out and leave. And then the first one will pull back in and probably park in the first tandem spot. Or they might just go to an unassigned parking space to allow the first vehicle to leave, and then just leave it in the unassigned parking space till they're ready to go.
I foresee a lot of driving in these lanes in reverse, which I think really does present a little bit of a safety issue.
I think all of the parking spaces you're going to have to reverse in order to leave, which is not uncommon to any type of shopping center that you may shop at. When you have 90-degree parking and two-way circulation aisles, you have to drive in reverse to leave the spot. So this is not an atypical situation.
It's more than reverse to leave a spot. You have to reverse and go down an aisle in reverse in order to get to a place where you can go forward.
If you're at the end of any of these circulation aisles, that last spot can pull out and then pull forward up the aisle towards the one-way circulation perimeter aisle and then park in an available space. You're not going to be backing up out of any of these spaces all the way out to the perimeter circulation aisle.
I disagree. You're going to have to back out all the way out to one of the other aisles.
We're going to respectfully disagree then.
I actually have another question.
Sure.
To Dave's point. Is it fair to rely on the other empty spaces that may or may not exist? Is it fair, I mean, as this planning board, as it relates to us, is it fair for us to assume that those spaces necessarily would be empty and available for somebody to do that. I mean, in maybe the best case scenario, but what if in the worst case scenario, someone had a party, someone had visitors, somebody else had their cleaning people, someone else had a service person, painting apartments, I don't know, whatever people do, but they might have guests. So is it fair in just terms of circulation, safety, and again, to Dave's point, having to back out? Should we assume that there'll always be a parking space or a way for somebody to avoid backing up that distance?
Well, I think there's a flawed assumption. My opinion is that someone is not going to back out of one of the spaces that are at the end of the circulation aisles and then back out in reverse all the way to the perimeter circulation aisle. So we can respectfully disagree on that point. I'm offering you my opinion as an expert in traffic engineering. That's not going to happen.
Okay. And then
Similarly, I don't think the board has to rely on, if there's an available parking space in the aisle where somebody needs to back out because there's a tandem space. No, I don't think you should rely on that solely. I think you're charged with looking at things practically. You're going to hear from the applicant where he has this type of tandem parking in multiple projects that's operated without issue. I can tell you I've worked on 2 projects where this identical design is implemented in operation, and I can tell you it is operated without issue. If you want to talk worst case scenario, and I think it's very unlikely to happen, but worst case scenario, somebody can pull out, leave the site, and then come back in and then park where they need to park if they need to let somebody out. But that would assume that there's no available parking spaces in the aisle that they're coming from or anywhere else on the site.
So we're actually kind of speculating here, but I guess then if 2 people had to do that, that would then add to your traffic generation, your trips.
It would.
And then that would change that number.
In terms of the driveway movements, absolutely. I can tell you that the analysis shows the driveways are going to operate with very high excess capacity.
Okay.
So in the unlikely event you get a couple people going out and coming back in, there will be absolutely no issue with respect to the driveway operations or operations along Broad.
Mr. DeSero, can I ask a question?
Sure.
On something you said earlier that raised a point and made me think. So my husband, I love him dearly. I am Italian, he is not. And he is, he's a little lazy, but I love him. So let's just pretend that him and I have a tandem spot and we're in one of these wonderful apartments. And he knows he has to leave for a meeting early in the morning and he gets home before I do from work because I'm here at a board meeting like you. He would park in the second tandem spot and force me, his lovely wife, to go and drive around and use a different spot that is unoccupied at that time. So maybe it's more towards the applicant, but what would you do to ensure that my husband and I, who have these 2 tandem spots, aren't taking up other spots from folks that live in the building, right? Because based on your calculations at 187 spots, I know that there's only 4, quote-unquote, above the quota for the spots. What would you do to ensure that we are both parking in the spots and that we're assigned to? I guess, and it more may be an operations thing, but he would absolutely do that, not even a question. So I guess, and you had brought something up, and I started thinking, because it would be one of those things, he'd park in the back spot, so so he didn't have to move the car in the morning because he would have to leave early. And so technically, we'd be taking up 3 spots when we're assigned 2 in the building. And that's a real situation.
Right, at all times, there will be a minimum of 53 unassigned spaces, and that number could actually be 75 unassigned spaces.
Or it could be 30 if people have extra cars that move in. If you have additional drivers that need extra spots in the garage, am I right? Like they could be assigned. I'm just asking. Right?
Well, let's go through the numbers again so it's clear. 74 units will have 1 space assigned to them. 19 units will have the tandem spots assigned to them. That leaves 75 additional parking spaces, 22 of which the applicant has indicated they would assign to a unit if that unit didn't have a tandem space and wanted an additional parking space. So you could have a minimum of 53 that would be unassigned at all times, and that could go up to 75 if there's no other people in the building that would like to have a second parking space, but they've only been assigned one. So at all times, you're going to have 53 unassigned parking spaces, so there's going to be more than enough
To cover my husband.
to cover
and
your
the
husband.
park.
And what I would tell him is, hey, you know you have a meeting and you're going to leave early, go park in an unassigned spot and let me park in the tandem spot.
Right. And look, I understand it's all based on numbers, math, data, facts. I get all that. But those are real-life situations. And again, I don't know how many cars there are, all the, tenants would bring, but it's a real-life situation.
And
So-
just to allay some of those concerns, again, we're parked at 2 spots per unit.
Right.
Actual peak parking demands per ITE are 1.2 per
So
unit.
I looked at that.
So
Understood.
we have more than an excess in terms of average peak parking demands for apartment complexes like the one that's proposed.
Yeah. He would just take the one closer to the door, so.
Yes, he would.
Dan, just a quick question. Were the handicap spaces, how were they assigned? How did they, or are they not in that mix of unassigned
The
spaces?
53 includes the accessible parking spaces.
Okay.
And obviously, if one of the residents were handicapped,
Then that would be.
then they absolutely can be assigned.
But then you make it up on the other end, okay.
Correct.
Yeah, so, I'm sorry, so when you say the 53 spaces, originally you said 53 spaces will be unassigned. Basically, they are unassigned, but they include the ADA compliant
The accessible
spaces.
parking spaces, correct.
Building.
You good? Okay. John Jar, would you like to ask questions, Mr. Desario?
Has Mr. Jor been sworn in on this application yet?
Might as well.
Okay.
Yeah. John, can you raise your right hand? Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Okay, and just for the record, state your name and business address.
John Jar, Petrie Traffic, 155 Passaic Avenue, Fairfield, New Jersey.
Mr. Wells, do you stipulate that Mr. Jar is a traffic engineer expert?
We actually did previously on the last record. Yes, I'll believe it.
Yeah, thank you. I forgot. All right, thank you, Mr. Jar.
Thank you. Just from record-keeping purposes, there were traffic studies submitted by the applicant and reviews done by our office, starting with August 24th of 2016, an additional evaluation January 26, 2017, and reports written by my office January 26, 2017, and April 19, 2017. The applicant has responded to my concerns with regard to the traffic study, and they have answered all of the questions to my satisfaction regarding the traffic and parking impacts for this project. I have no further questions regarding the traffic studies or the traffic impacts, as all of my questions and concerns have been addressed by them either in writing or by the various hearings. With regard to the parking, there isn't too much else I can say about tandem parking. I think that you guys have adequately vetted your concerns with it. I would like to ask if, I may be missing something, how are outside folks and visitors handled in the site plan? In other words, let's say that somebody's late for the train one day and can they get in your place and park there? Is there going to be restricted parking? How's that going to work?
No outsiders will be able to park on the site unless they're a visitor or a resident. And that's purely, again, goes back to management, and you'll hear from the applicant a little later after me what the management plan is. But this is not an atypical project for them. They have probably hundreds of these types of projects throughout the country.
Okay. I would like to say that I agree strongly with the applicant's traffic engineer with regard to the possibility of excess parking available on site. So I'm not quite sure how that's going to work, but is there some rule or requirement that if if they do have a significant amount of excess parking, are they going to be allowed to vendor it, to sell it to others to use? If that becomes the case, how does that work? And is there anything that we need to worry about with that? Maybe you can give us a little guidance from the applicant's point of view on this?
I can tell you that the village does not presently have an ordinance that would necessarily allow that, but, for example, members of the council, Mayor, members of the council have had some negotiations with the YMCA that has some access spaces, but right now there is no facilitating ordinance for that would allow someone to lower the amount of parking that they're required to have by leasing the spaces to someone else.
Well, for the sake of conservatism, okay, you're providing RSIS in excess parking. If in the future you find that you really only need half of the parking that you've now provided, what protections can the village have that you're not going to now sell that parking to say...
To my point exactly, the village has a protection. We have to have the parking that's required. What I'm telling you, I thought you were asking, as a practical matter, if that was a desirable result to do that, that would take some legal craftsmanship, not just on the village point. I'm not exactly sure you could do that in the face of the state law that requires the spaces of the RSAS.
So basically, the condition of your approval is to meet the RSA parking. If you ever want to change that, then you would have to come back to this board or even another. Okay. I just wanted to make sure because...
And honestly, where, as a commercial use, where it's not dictated by RSIS, I think it would be possible for the village to allow someone to no longer to lease some of their spaces because they weren't needed and to allow less spaces for the village requirement. I'm not sure they can do that with RSIS.
Yeah. I think the board is more concerned that there's not going to be enough parking. I'm concerned what happens if there's too much. So it sounds to me like the village is protected to the maximum extent possible. And that's all I wanted to make certain. I didn't want to overlook that. I wanted to make sure the village had the maximum possible protection if it went either way.
And I've spoken to the applicant, and the applicant stipulates that none of the parking that's proposed will ever be leased to a third party in any way, shape, or form.
Just point of reference, Mr. Jor. In another community, this issue came up. And I think Mr. Wells hit it on the head when he said the requirement for the amount of parking spaces doesn't change. In the other community, they had enough parking, they had extra parking that didn't count to their requirements. That had to be a private agreement and then approved by the planning board, as Scott Shagan said. In this instance, what are we talking about? 157, 187, 183, there's 5 spots. I don't think it makes any sense to let them out anyhow. But
there's also the concept, as you're very familiar with, of shared parking. So that, in other words, there are provisions of the code that allow commercial uses to essentially lower their requirement based on shared parking. But that's not, none of that applies.
Just trying to make sure the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. I'm sure you can understand my concern for the village's best interests. I think that they've stipulated to everything in my report. I'm quite pleased with where the applicant stands on the traffic issues on this. I think that they've done everything they can to mitigate in my opinion, they've done everything they can within reason to mitigate their pedestrian and vehicular impacts to the maximum extent that I can see at this juncture. I do think that we will have to come and look at this somewhere down the road if this board does choose to see this application favorably. I think we may want to look at how it really does get parked and how many people really are walking up and down as compared to driving. And I think that that's something that the traffic report is definitely conservative, and I think that things may flip, in actual reality later. And I think we're protected on both sides. I really don't have anything else. I think that they've satisfied all of my concerns. Is there any questions the board might have of me with regard to their traffic study?
Okay, we're not to that point. We're just crossing him, so we'll move on.
I'm done asking questions, other than I know for a fact that when his daughter doesn't get up in the morning, he's got to move the car.
Yeah, it's true. Okay. Chris, do you have any questions? Beth, do you have any questions?
No, I don't.
Okay. All right. Next, anyone from the public have any questions for Mr. Desario?
Can we ask John questions? Or are we going to get to the point where we can ask John questions?
Yeah.
Okay,
we're
good.
not there yet.
Oh, good, thank you.
Mr. Wells still has the stage.
Understood.
Yeah. Is there anyone from the public that wants to ask questions of the traffic expert? Okay, seeing there are none.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yep. Okay.
My name is Mr. Jarman. So I'd like to call Scott Loventhal.
Sure.
Good evening, Mr. Leventhal. Raise your right hand, please. Swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes, I do.
And please state your name, your business title, and your business address.
Sure. Scott Loventhal, spelled Loventhal, Garden Homes Development, 820 Morris Turnpike, Short Hills, New Jersey. And I'm a managing member of Ridgewood Dayton LLC, the applicant this evening.
What I'd like to do, with your permission, Mr. Loventhal and the board, is he's not an expert, so we're not going to qualify him as an expert per se, but I'm going to ask him if he would to just give you a little bit of an introduction of what he does and in the development process and his familiarity with this particular project. And then I'm simply going to allow him, because he did take notes as to the things that were raised with the concerns that he could address, and I'm just going to let him answer those, bring those matters, and then be available for your questions.
Sure.
You're on.
Sure. So I am the Director of Development for Garden Homes. Garden Homes is a privately held real estate development company with a number of disciplines, residential being our largest, both for sale and rental communities throughout the Northeast and, quite frankly, throughout the country. I oversee most of our development activity here in northern New Jersey. Part of what I do is initially identifying sites, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, and why we identified this site and what we thought was important as we looked at this site. I initially identify sites. I work with our acquisition professionals in acquiring these sites and ultimately take them through the entitlement process, hiring a team of professionals, including many of which have testified here for you this evening, and in past hearings, of course, from site engineers, architects, environmental experts, geotechnical experts, planners, so on and so forth, in order to create a project that ultimately is well received within the community and provides us a return. And how do we get our return? We get our return, quite frankly, from providing an experience to our resident, a resident either in the form of a renter or in a purchaser. That's a good experience. In this case, we're going to be up for our grades. We're going to get graded once a year by our residents. And if the project is not marketable and the project doesn't provide an experience to our residents that is a good one, they have other choices. We call them today renters by choice. You know, our world has changed, and it used to be a home ownership world. Now there are still plenty that would like to see home ownership, but there are plenty that would like to rent. And that's why we identified this site as a wonderful place for renters. We identified this site as a wonderful place for young renters. We think some young professionals that have grown up in this community will probably want to rent here as a stepping stone to where they may live in the future, hopefully Ridgewood. And more likely, empty nesters who have lived many years within Ridgewood and don't have, and that's one of the things I'll talk about in a second in terms of identifying a site that we think will be well received within the community, that don't have a housing choice that we're providing for here. And we identified Ridgewood as a community that I think many, many moons ago at a master plan amendment, I looked at the inventory with, at the time, the planning board, and suggested to them there hadn't been an appreciable number of new units, residential units, built in the village of Ridgewood in almost 40 years. That's remarkable, considering that Ridgewood is such a balanced community in terms of its housing stock, with the exception of what I just suggested, and also is such a vibrant community, one that we think can be made more vibrant by the virtue of introducing some 24-hour life in your downtown. So when we had an opportunity to identify what we know, one of the difficulties in Ridgewood when we look back is that there weren't available assemblages of land. And unfortunately, the recession led to car dealerships being one of the true victims of the recession. Car dealerships that weren't located along state highways, where they probably, at least in this day and age, are probably more placed more appropriately along state highways, where they have opportunity for shopping at a number of variety of auto dealerships. The downtown just didn't present what it may have presented in the 1940s and 50s when the Brogan Cadillac site was first put into existence. So we identified a derelict property, one that was closed and one that was available, and looked at that site being within a quarter mile of a rail station and a bus station. I think that's been lost in a lot of the testimony that's presented. We also have a very robust bus station here in Ridgewood, and I think that we're within walking distance, so it provides our potential residents with more options: vehicle, pedestrian options, train, and bus. And that's very unique, and that was what was one of the things that was certainly very unique to this site. We also found a site where we, in what we do, could, without much assemblage, we just have 2 parcels here, could provide a project that presents the opportunity for appropriate staffing. We usually try and look for projects that are approximately 100 units in size, and that allows us to staff them appropriately. This gave us something in that general range in the downtown of Ridgewood, and presented what we think was what we know, quite frankly, was a void in your housing stock, an opportunity for those young professionals and young people within the community, and more likely empty nesters. We'll also see our share of demographics throughout the spectrum, of course, within what we'll be developing. But as I said, I think it's really important that this project ultimately be well received in the community. But more important, or just as important, is that it needs to be well received by the residents that are going to live there, because they're going to have the choice. So when we talk about tandem parking, when we talk about uses, this project won't be for everybody. I think elevator buildings with interior hallways are not going to be for everyone. Do I think that I'll find 93 people, 93 residents that want to live here? Absolutely. Our studies suggest that we will. And the project can be a success and be one that provides for a void in this housing market here. What's another goal that we have? We want to provide a safe, efficient experience for our residents. Why? So they renew. It's that simple. We really want them to renew. We also, having a large portfolio of real estate, it's very important to us that a lot of things that were talked about from a safety perspective, that those things are implemented. If they're not implemented by our own management team, we have issues related to insurance and casualties and claims, and those are not good for our business. So we pride ourselves on doing everything correctly, not just simply minimum codes, and I'll talk about that in a minute in the context of a few items that I picked up along the way, not simply meeting the bare minimums, but providing things that are above and beyond the code in order to provide an experience for our residents that's going to have them renew their lease and hopefully pay an increase in rent at the end of that term as well. You know, those are negotiated also. So I think those are goals that we wanted to talk about. Along the way, I picked up on about a half a dozen items that I wanted to speak to. A few of them are very, very brief. The first and foremost that came up, I think, in our first evening was a concern about our methods for removal of sanitation and recycling. With this building being unique to Ridgewood, I understand that the process by which how we remove recycling and sanitation is very, very important. The first thing that I did as a development professional is I spoke to your professionals, and I spoke to an Ed Bethune and a John Spano of your DPW at the time, this goes back now some time, and a Linda Salvi of your DPW and your recycling department to get Ridgewood's specifics on recycling. Not the county's, Ridgewood's, right out of your code. And how does Ridgewood want to handle recycling, and how does Ridgewood want to handle trash removal? So what we're generally doing is looking at our own operations first, and then we're looking at the municipality's operations and trying to obviously blend those two so that they work correctly. In this instance, I can tell you without any concern whatsoever that we will be in full compliance with your recycling requirements and full requirement with your trash removal requirements. I understand that we'll be required to hire private sanitation, and from an operations perspective, what we ultimately do, these elevator-style buildings will have either a single, in this case 2, trash chutes, one on each wing of the building. Residents will be bringing their trash to that trash chute. They will not be leaving it in the trash room. They'll be bringing that trash, and that trash will enter a trash chute. It will then come down to our ground level, where it will enter a compactor. It will be compacted into a very small mass, And then on those trash pickup days, the sanitation trucks will have a very limited time that they need to spend on site, because our on-staff porters will be removing those 4-yard containers that are very small, that are contained with the top. They'll be removing those to where they're meeting those sanitation trucks, and they'll be offloading that sanitation. It's about a 5 or 10 minute operation. It's very clean. It doesn't leave anything. While we do provide, because your ordinance provides for a location for an outside dumpster, that's really in a rare occasion where we have some overflow. We talked about events, something that might go on in a community room, cardboard, people that are moving in. Then they can't fit those things in a trash room or in a compactor, and they're going to be brought to an outside dumpster, which of course details of which are provided for on our site plans, an outside dumpster, and that trash will also be picked up on those trash days. With regard to recycling, I reviewed your recycling requirements. We can meet them in their entirety. Recycling will be handled through regulations with our management company. People, of course, will be policed to be recycling, just as you're policed in your single-family home or your townhome or in any other rental community within the village. And yes, it is somewhat of an honor system, that hoping that people are going to do their part in terms of recycling. But we will meet all of the recycling requirements in terms of separation and in terms of how that recycling is handled. Recycling is left generally in bins in those trash rooms, which are on each floor, so it's very convenient for our residents. And then those recycling bins throughout the day are removed to the outside dumpster location, and those recycling bins are then removed by a recycling vendor who will come through on a frequency that will be set by us based on the demands of the complex. So I wanted to get that out of the way. I know that was important. Are there any questions on sanitation recycling? Pretty straightforward. Environmental, I know, was a concern I think Councilman Boyd raised and several others, and I want to, since I don't profess to be an expert, and I'm not suggesting I am, but I'm going to read to you where we stand in terms of an environmental remediation on the site. There was, and continues to be, there's one remaining environmental issue on the site, which I'll talk about in a moment. But there was, when the Brogan Company ceased their operations, they did hire a licensed site remediation professional, an LSRP, and a licensed environmental firm. The LSRP is now mandated by the state, and the LSRP acts in the place of the state, and he is actually overseeing the work that is being performed by the environmental company who is cleaning the site. They completed a Phase 1 environmental site assessment. They did have a number of areas of concern, as we know, AOCs they're called, that were identified. They then completed a Phase 2, and I can only characterize many of the environmental issues that existed, and I'm using past tense because the majority have been remediated since we've been in this process for now more than 5 years since they hired their licensed site remediation professional. Most of the environmental issues that existed on the site were what you would typically find in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s in an automobile use. They were hydraulic fluids, they were oils, they were various things associated with the lifts that were in the garages. Of what I think initially were more than 40 AOCs in areas of concern that were identified, we are now down to one. The only one that remains is one that is what we call historic fill. And historic fill is identified by the DEP as what people used to do in New Jersey and throughout the country when they would take down a structure. They'd bury it. What has been identified through a remarkable number of borings on this site is wood, shingles, various products that were probably attributable to the single-family homes that I'm sure at some point and small commercial buildings that existed on this site many years ago. The historic fill, the manner in which historic fill is removed will be done so it's done efficiently in connection with the excavation of this site. It will continue to be overseen by the licensed site remediation professionals and will ultimately lead to what's called a response action outcome, or what used to be known as a no further action letter. So the one remaining AOC, if this board is so inclined to grant us an approval, will be taken care of in connection with the excavation. The grading was considered in connection with where that historic fill is located. There may be, in some instances, because it's never an exact science, some areas that are over-excavated. If there's more debris, wood, building materials that are found in the ground. All of that material is offloaded and manifested appropriately in accordance with DEP regulations and is sent to, in many cases, sometimes it's listed as classified or unclassified, and sent to a variety of a variety of landfills in various places. And then ultimately that historic fill issue will be resolved. So that, from an environmental perspective, I wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of where we stand. There's been a long and arduous process over the last 5 years that the Brogan Company has undertaken. We have, as a contract purchaser, have our own, so there's now a third party, an environmental expert who is overseeing, kind of doing a peer review of that environmental work. So there's actually 3 people that are reviewing where we stand. The interesting thing about where this site sits is that the DEP wouldn't necessarily require that historic fill to be removed, and that historic fill could, if the site was not developed, continue to contribute to environmental issues in and around this property. But in connection with what we hope will be a development of the site, that last area of concern will be taken care of. Any questions on environmental? Okay, great. Tandem parking, and maybe I should have started there since it was something that was on everyone's mind. While tandem parking is not something that is provided for in your ordinance is silent as it relates to tandem parking, I can tell you, having developed 6 recent communities where we have tandem parking in northern New Jersey, it is both safe, it is efficient, and the residents generally are most appreciative that they have the opportunity to have 2 spaces with some of those more coveted units. And we generally do that by virtue of the size of the unit, the rent that's obviously paid as to which units are getting 2 spaces. If someone didn't want 2 spaces that were in a tandem format, we do have the opportunity, because of the flexibility in our parking here, to potentially give one resident spaces that are next to each other because of the unassigned nature of some of those spaces. Or, as my theme earlier on, this project may not be for them if they don't like a tandem space, but they like a large unit, and they're just uncomfortable with the concept of pulling out of a tandem space. I can tell you that we have not had, that I'm aware of, a single incident from a safety perspective, a single fender bender. I could tell you that, it's hard for me sitting on my hands during all of these hearings to not, scream out. Often, I think it's overstated as it relates to how much traffic is under a parking level on any given time of day, morning, noon, or night. There's virtually no cars, and I've witnessed this myself and have experienced at each of our projects. There's very few cars. Yes, during that peak hour you may have some movement of vehicles, but usually within any given row, there's never more than 1 or 2 cars at any given moment. And residents get used to the tandem space. They want 2 spaces. They want to control their spaces. They're reserved, as I said, for that resident. And very, very quickly, just like backing out of the driveway into, often, as Dan suggested, a busy street, which they won't be doing here. They'll only be backing out into a very lightly trafficked interior access driveway. They do it once or twice, and they're used to it. And ultimately, we haven't had anyone that has said to us in any of our complexes where we have tandem parking that they are uncomfortable with it and they want to move, and they want to move out of that tandem space. We haven't had, that I'm aware of, anyone that's ever made that complaint. They get used to it very, very quickly, and most of them are very appreciative that they have that premium of 2 spaces assigned. I will also say to you something that's lost in the tandem parking, and why a lot of municipalities are now actually including it in their ordinances, is that it leads to less impervious surface. When you have an impervious surface, meaning paved areas, when you have parking that's up against one another, as opposed to needing another 24-foot drive aisle, you now have 2 spaces, one behind one another, and you're reducing impervious surface. So we're able to get more parking within a smaller footprint. So yes, it's a technique that we're applying that you might say, well, it's a way of getting around the aisle. From our perspective, we're saying, why need more paved surfaces? We're putting more parking under a building where residents are desirous of that parking, and giving them a better experience by having covered parking that is protected. So we haven't found it to be an issue. We find it to be safe and efficient in all of our projects. And the closest one that I've spoken about in the past with this board and with the governing body is a project that we built on 208 in Fair Lawn, the Fair Lawn Promenade project. Each of our 2 residential buildings there, which are more luxurious apartments, contain tandem parking, and the tandem parking is very efficient in that complex as well. So if anyone was interested in looking at it, it's right here on Route 208, only 10 minutes from the project. Elevators. I think Councilman Voigt was concerned about elevators and the ability to accommodate, and it may have been mayor as well. Nevertheless, what I wanted to do was make sure that everyone understood that the local building codes do require at least one elevator to accommodate a stretcher. Stretchers are not accommodated lying flat. They're accommodated with an angle. Those elevator cab heights are 9 foot instead of a standard elevator, which would be less than 8 foot. They have a cab width that's 7'5". They have a depth that's about 6 foot, and a door width that's 4 foot. That's not necessarily a standard elevator. That's an elevator that accommodates a stretcher. We use several brands. Every style of elevator, whether it be Otis, Kone, Tyson Krupp, all have a stretcher accommodating elevator. I can stipulate that all of the elevators in our building will accommodate a stretcher, and that the third elevator that we spoke about will have that 9-foot height as well, if not more, so that we can accommodate moving from that third elevator. So from a safety perspective, we are more than confident that we not only meet the minimum code, but we're going to be doing that in each of the elevators to allow for that stretcher if necessary. Any elevator-related questions?
I have a question real quick.
Sure.
Did you just say that elevators accommodate not stretchers that are not laying flat?
Right. The elevators, an elevator that is deemed an elevator that accommodates a stretcher, they don't lay flat. That's correct. The way that a person that is transported, and I don't profess to be an emergency expert, but I'm just telling you what these elevators are, has a person that's in an angled position. So the stretcher is angled so the person is almost sitting not completely upright, somewhat extended in probably a 45-degree angle, and that is a stretcher accommodating elevator. None of the elevators, other than maybe very large freight elevators that you wouldn't find in a residential setting like this, would not accommodate a flat stretcher, and your emergency services would not be utilizing a flat stretcher. I'll take it a step further that I also spoke to your emergency services. I wanted to talk to them about the concerns that were raised and sprinkled throughout this about safety as it relates to an ambulance or a rig that might be going under this building. They made it very clear to me that under no circumstances would they ever bring an ambulance or an emergency services rig under this building. They don't need to. There's only a very short distance from either the front door or the driveway that circulates around the building, and they would not be bringing an they would not be bringing an ambulance under this building. So, and I can certainly refer to who we spoke to and what information they gave us as it relates to the ambulances, if you're interested. We spoke to a Tony Lillo, who was your chief and director of Ridgewood Emergency Services. He indicated that while their tallest elevator is 9'8", that the 8'2", which is required by code, is all that he would be looking for, and we have stipulated that our parking level will be at 8'2" throughout. I also brought with me, as it relates to height, and it was something that we can hand out and enter as an exhibit. What that detail looks like as it relates to warning signs that go in so that our buildings are not damaged.
Yeah, that's it. Mr. Wells, we got to make sure he's checked out now. It's done.
Thank you.
Let's 822.
So, I'm thinking of it.
Garage height photo? Yeah, that's right. Garage height photo?
I work with I sure will.
We know what building this is? I'm sorry? What building?
Yes, this is a building that we're developing. If anyone is going south on the Garden State Parkway at the Essex Tolls in Bloomfield and wants to see another project that is consistent with what we're doing, this project is called Oaks Pond. It's located on the southbound side of the Garden State Parkway in Bloomfield, just at the Essex Tolls. You see our last building is going up as you speak. We've got 3 buildings there, approximately 300 units, a clubhouse, a pool, and amenities. And many of the operations in those buildings are identical to the operations that we would, and consistent with the operations that we would expect here. So what this photo is providing, just to put an orientation and to put it into perspective, is as you're entering below the building, we call out the 8'2" clearance height, and what I would say to you is that where that yellow boom is not 8'2". So if somebody hits that, they know that they're already too high, but the 8'2" is actually up above that. So it gives us a little bit of a warning. If somebody hits it, you hope that they're only, let's say, about 7'8", 7'10". They hit it and they go, hey, maybe not so fast, and they don't go under that building. So that's what we're providing, and it's a standard detail that we provide in all of our buildings in order to provide safety, in order to make sure that we don't have a scenario where a vehicle that's too tall for under the building goes under that building and either damages the building or compromises our sprinkler system. I think someone asked also along the way if there was ever a car fire or something like that under the building, how would that be taken care of? And your emergency services made it very clear. They would simply be pulling a hose to that location from either our standpipe or likely from the hydrant on the street, and they would not be bringing a rig under a building. Our dry system that would exist, the sprinkler system has both a wet system and a dry system. In places where we don't have temperature control, it's a dry system. So the garage level has a dry system. Our dry system would likely be activated and would probably be putting out any minor vehicular fire even before emergency services are there. Questions on garage height, signage? Your planner and a number of, your planner being Beth McManus and not Blaze earlier, brought up a question that I wanted to address, and I think that might be my last one, regarding insulation and how we are going to, what details are we going to implement in order to ensure that a project that is adjacent to the rail ultimately provides for that tenant experience that we're obviously looking for. So what I wanted to indicate to the board and to Beth is while our construction documents are not complete, obviously, at this stage, what we do in these scenarios where in Bloomfield, along the Garden State Parkway, or in other instances where we're along rail, and I've built in Allendale, and along the rail, seems to be a theme for obvious reasons that along the rail is a good place in northern New Jersey for residential now. What we're doing is we're looking from a code perspective, and we're hiring not only an architect, but we hire an acoustic specialist, and we have an acoustic specialist by the name of Michael Spencer, who's from Pennsylvania, who's widely used in the industry. And what he does is he analyzes sound both from our basic code-compliant architectural plans, and then he makes recommendations that will allow us to, and I want to use the term correctly, to improve upon the STC rating, the Sound Transmission Code rating. Right now, code in residential settings is a 45. What that number means, I don't know, but we will not be designing these buildings to a 45, at least along the rear. I also think it's important to note that the design of this building leaves us with virtually no units that are directly oriented on the rail. In fact, as I'll just walk to the plan, if you recall from the floor plans, most of the ends of our building are where we contain our stairs or stair towers, and there we've got 2 levels of 12-inch block to also help with insulation. But even along the sides of this building, and even along our amenity deck areas, what we will be doing, both from our windows as well as our walls, our windows will have a soundproofing to them that will improve the STC, probably over 50, and I'm just putting that out there, 45 being standard. Somewhere between 50 and 55 is a robust detail. We will also be implementing either bat insulation that is soundproofed or blown-in insulation, which is a technique as well that we use in these environments. Again, from our perspective, while I'm appreciative and respectful that the board asked the question, it is only in our best interest to provide a living environment that we recognize a train schedule here. One of the reasons why the residents will want to be here is because of that train schedule, but they want to make the train in the morning, and they want to be sleeping through the night. If they're not, that's the grade that we get as a failing grade, and they don't renew their lease. And I think that that's something important where we say, well, what if? As a renter by choice, you have a 12-month lease. If we ever had someone that was completely dissatisfied, there's ways of getting out of your lease sooner. But we're always about providing quiet enjoyment in our lease and ultimately providing that experience that we spoke about that's going to have them renew that lease in the future. So these sound deadening techniques are important to us and will ultimately be implemented in this building. I'm not sure that I had anything else that I came up with along the way.
Any landscape plan or anything like that?
Say that again, I'm sorry?
Landscape issues, I know you're not the designer.
There was extensive testimony on that by Mr.
I know, but this
Yeah,
is from the manager.
I could certainly at least provide, from a maintenance perspective?
Yeah, maintenance and maybe some of the landscape ideas. I mean,
I will tell you that
laying out a nice overview here.
your ordinance does not require lawn sprinklers, and I know that there are debates amongst environmentalists whether lawn sprinklers are good or bad or indifferent, bless you. From our perspective, we will be considering the recommendations of our landscape professionals, but we don't have a significant amount of turfed areas, but we do anticipate that we will be sprinklering our landscape beds and we'll be sprinkling our turf, because we want to keep things green, but we'll be doing so in a manner that is consistent with any local ordinances or any DEP obligations, and certainly won't have an impact if you have a water demand issue in the peak months. That's the first thing that's obviously shut down is sprinklers and goes to either odd even. We find that less watering is better. In terms of the plantings, we are proposing, as had been discussed by Al LePac, our civil engineer, a lawn area along the frontage of the building, a small courtyard that exists where there'll be a robust planting. We then have on this design 3 amenity decks, and I certainly wanted to give a little bit of detail as to what those amenity decks include. They're part of course, the recreational component or the active and passive recreation obligation within the ordinance, but we provide them because this is a site that really doesn't have a significant amount of otherwise places for someone to sit outside and enjoy the weather. I will say that every one of these units, and I don't know if it came up with our architect, every one of these units does have a balcony, so there, and that of course was calculated in our outdoor space as well. But in addition to the private, and those will be private balconies, in addition to the private balconies, each of the rectangular green, and I'm pointing to our overall site plan, each of the rectangular green amenity decks are over the parking level, of course, so allowing us for that large footprint under the parking level to provide protection. And those amenity decks, while they're shown in green, they are not all turf, and they're not calculated as all turf in any of the calculations. They're a combination of hardscapes, seating areas. It's passive, of course, recreation, because they're only between 40 and 50 feet wide. But they are separated from the units that are at grade on that level, so that resident that lives at that level would have a private balcony like any unit above him. But then there'd be a screening, and they'd be separated by usually some plantings and a railing. And then the rest of the amenity deck would be accessible to all residents for use. And we generally have a set number of hours for those outside amenity decks so that they're not providing for any disturbance to any of the residents late in the evening. And what I think was important that I bring up in this building, this will be a highly amenitized building. And how do we define amenities? First, amenity starts with staffing. We're proposing a daytime concierge. We do not anticipate at this point that we would have a 24-hour manned desk because it just doesn't warrant it with the number of units. But we have a daytime concierge that's available for residents. We also utilize a very sophisticated building links, it's called, a computerized system that allows our residents to communicate back and forth with our desk attendees. That building links allows them to handle both management issues, maintenance issues, emergency issues, and security issues. Each unit also is equipped with a video intercom system that would allow access. So during the day, a guest would need to be announced, other than if a code is given out to a rear door or something like that, but a guest would be announced with our daytime concierge, and they would be buzzed up to a residence. So these are not going to be units where outside solicitation would be allowed by either people who are selling encyclopedias. Are they doing that nowadays? I don't think so. Selling whatever they might be selling, they won't be doing it in this building. And I think that the emphasis, which I could have stipulated to several moments ago, is that the amenities are not open to the public. It's very important. The parking, we have no intentions of it being open to the public unless, as has been discussed in the past, we truly are parked at 1.2, and the municipality is interested in figuring out a way in which we can utilize some of that additional parking to the benefit of the community or the benefit of the public. And that would take a very robust, detailed document because we don't necessarily want to introduce the public onto this site. I'd rather have more parking, which I anticipate we will, than we need, than not have enough and give up 10, 20, 30 spaces to an outside agency. So we'll never be doing that. Any of the amenities that we offer in our public spaces, we have not completely programmed our public spaces yet. We do so as we get closer to a project being completed, but we intend on having an interior community room at the ground level that will be available on a routine basis for community functions within the community. It's also available only to our tenants to use for private functions on a very short-term basis, little birthday parties or a Super Bowl party or things along those lines. We've got a package room. All of the postal services are taken care of within the lobby area. So the resident will enter our lobby, and he'll be picking up his mail in his own U.S. Postal approved post office box. We also know that nowadays with Amazon and the like, a package room is very important, and we even consider in some of our buildings now a refrigerated package room with all of the deliveries that come both from the short-term delivery services and things like Peapod and Fresh Direct and things like that. So we consider even refrigerated package rooms. It's also important to know that our entire premises are always security, that we have cameras that are 24/7 monitored. That will provide us with video if there's any issues on site. So these are very secure sites, both interior to our project, out on our amenity decks, and throughout the perimeter of the development, in order to give those residents just every comfort level. We're not gating. I think that was something that came up, the detail that I showed you in terms of how you enter and exit the parking below the building. We will not be gating those spaces. And maybe it's a good time when a question came up, I think, with Debbie and Melanie regarding how we enforce parking. So what we would be doing is one of several methods. We'd either be giving out placards that hang from rearview mirrors, whatever ultimately the management on this site feels is going to be the most visible for them. Sometimes it's stickers, sometimes it's placards, sometimes it's a variety of techniques where they're going to be given an assigned numbered parking space, and they're going to have a placard that's going to be assigned for that unit, and that unit's number is going to be consistent with that space, and they're going to be parking there. Now, there are going to be the unassigned parking spaces, which will be available to our residents. We require, as visitors come to the site, that they register their vehicle. It's usually a very quick, write your license plate and your number down, and assuming we don't see a vehicle that's consistently parking there on a daily basis where we know someone is, sneaking into the lot and running to the train, we try and, be loose with how we enforce the visitors' parking, because we don't want them to think that, that we're overstepping our bounds. But we have a very a sufficient system in place by which we monitor our residents' parking and our visitors' parking to ensure that third parties are not parking on the site. I think that's all that I have.
Okay. Dave, did you have any questions for Mr. Leventhal?
No.
Councilman Voigt?
Scott, you mentioned there was a couple of developments that you had put up in Fairlawn. Fairlawn. A couple
of two developments that we've built. Yes.
Yeah. What are the names of those again?
It's Fairlawn Promenade, which is the development that's on Route 208, which we opened about 3 years ago. It has the Starbucks, and it's a commercial and residential site. Our residential buildings, we have 150 residential units in 2 buildings in the rear of the property, 65,000 feet of commercial space. And next door to that property is Fairlawn Commons, which is a different style of housing. Those are walk-up buildings, 2- and 3-story walk-ups, more of a suburban setting.
Is that closer than Nabisco?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay.
That's right. Just south of Nabisco, just south of Columbia Savings and the Mac Cali building, or what was formerly Mac Cali.
And they have tandem parking, you said?
That's correct.
Okay.
The Fairlawn Promenade project has tandem parking under both buildings. The buildings have been in occupancy now for approximately 3 years, and I'm not aware of a single safety issue or a single incident, nor a single resident who did not find, who found issue with the tandem parking. Management says it operates very efficiently.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Scott, so just remind me, I know Peapod, Amazon, all the deliveries that come, with those units, there could be quite a few.
Yes.
So what is the plan for delivery? Where do the trucks deliver?
So we've identified a delivery space, actually a space along the most southern driveway. I can walk over and point to it.
Sure.
That's right. This is, again, 31-foot wide one-way driveway. We're striped along the most southern curve line, and that is striped for delivery short-term only. So we have the opportunity for both moving vans as well as those quick deliveries. But I'll be honest with you, with no parking, no parallel parking located along the frontage of our project, we can't police whether UPS, the Postal Service, or FedEx quickly stops, runs their packages in, and runs out. They may very well have what we do local law enforcement if they want to enforce those rules, but we do provide that parking that's available for those trucks. And we have found that 2 spaces, which in this case is about 70 feet long, which is more than 2 spaces for most of those small box trucks, is more than sufficient.
I mean, realistically, they're going to park in the street,
Correct.
Jump out, and make those deliveries.
I would suggest to you that that's probably the case, as is the case in most of your downtown, and quite frankly, most places. You know, they're third-party delivery services. While we can encourage them to use the spaces that are provided, and what often becomes the case is as you all know from your places of businesses and your home, those routes are very routine. Those drivers are often the same. I can tell you that we will always attempt to enforce the utilization of our parking spaces, but obviously we can't enforce parking on a public roadway. We can only encourage that they park in the right place. If there's another suggestion that you'd have, I'd certainly be willing to listen.
So let me just ask another question, because we've done all this traffic analysis based on cars coming and going that may or may not be living tenants. But where is the analysis of the potential impact of those vehicles? Or is that something that's just not contemplated? And maybe it's a question for John Jarr, I don't know. I mean, maybe you have some analysis or study that you've done at other locations as to how many vehicles of Peapod, Amazon, et cetera, come every day. But certainly that could add to the impact.
I would, without being a traffic expert, and I'll allow Dan to step up and John Jarr to offer his testimony, but my suggestion to answer that question is that ITE, which is what Dan and John refer to, the appropriate standards, I would only suspect includes, based on the type of use that's being analyzed, those various types of potential deliveries that may exist, and I would rather Dan step up and offer that on the record as the expert.
If Dan wants to sit, he can sit. The trip generation that Dan's proposed in his AM and peak hour calculations would actually include that, but most of the time those deliveries don't take place between the 7 to 9 and 4 to 6 hours. So the study is not studying that time period when we typically see those deliveries.
Okay, great. Got it, I understand. Thank you.
Francis, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions.
Melanie?
I just quickly, I wanted to go right back to the elevator thing for 1 second, just because we kind of went past it quickly. And I'm envisioning in my head somebody on the 4th floor of this building being given CPR, you know, and being in cardiac arrest, and then being propped up and put in an elevator and brought down to an ambulance. And it's not possible it's really not. So I actually looked up the New Jersey Building Code, and it does say that elevators in a new dwelling are to include or should provide, regardless of height, it has to meet the dimensional requirements of a 24 by 84-inch stretcher laying flat horizontally. So I'm wondering, will this, do your elevator, I didn't catch what size you said they were, but will they then meet that? Because I mean, I don't know how else you'd get somebody down.
I'm going to stipulate to you that it has been our experience in the past that while there may be 1 or 2 medical occasions that would suggest that they lie flat, we are providing elevators that are required under New Jersey's building code that meet those dimensions.
The 84 by 24 inch.
If that's what they are, that's what we're providing.
Well, that's the stretcher size. I don't know.
Or are you reading the elevator section, or you're reading a stretcher section?
No, I'm reading the elevator section.
Okay, in a residential mid-rise building, or in a healthcare scenario.
No, and in a residential building, and in a new. So it actually says in new buildings. Residential buildings 4 or more stories above grade, or 4 or more stories below grade at plane. At least 1 elevator shall be provided for the fire department emergency access to all floors. The car shall be of such a size and arrangement to accommodate a 24 by 84-inch ambulance stretcher in the horizontal open position.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to stipulate that if that's what you're telling me is the current code, then that's what our elevators will provide.
Okay. Right, I just wanted to check. I mean, I was just hearing, you can't, there's just certain medical instances in which you cannot prop somebody back up and bring them down, and I hope you're never, we're never in that position, but it certainly happens, so, okay, especially, yeah.
Our elevators will meet today's building code as it's required for accommodating those stretchers.
Okay.
Debbie?
Sure. So I did a little research on your website, and I understand you're both in commercial and residential.
Correct.
And my question to you is all of your residential are rentals, correct? So there's no condos? Or
That's not correct.
That's not correct?
No.
Okay. So in the state of New Jersey?
Yes.
What would you say around is your split on rental and condominium?
That are currently in development, that are currently in construction, that have been constructed over the last 50 years of our organization and
Anything
business.
that's up to anything that's under construction and built?
Anything that's
currently under construction, let's say that's...
I would say currently, we're doing approximately 80% of our projects as rental and approximately 20% as for sale, single-family condominium or townhome.
Okay.
In Bergen County, it happens to be about a 50-50 split. I've got four for-sale communities that are currently being finished, and 3 or 4 rental communities that are in development or construction.
And so how do you make your decision on if something is going to be a rental property or a condo property?
That's a very good question. There is often an analysis done, and in this instance, the analysis was done at a rental community, and the analysis is we're looking at the existing housing stock at the time that we're identifying the property. There are times that even in that cycle, because real estate is very cyclical, even within that cycle, we are considering a project that may have initially be considered for rental, we consider for sale, and sometimes vice versa. So there's a number of factors that are considered: local demographics, the aging population, a variety of factors that are studied in the analysis, and ultimately we came to a conclusion that there was a void in this community for this type of rental community, and from day one we were prepared to go with a rental community. The trend recently has been based on that concept of renters by choice, and there being less of a stigma that may have in previous generations be associated with rental product, that more product than not that's new is being built as rentals, and the market is absorbing that product in a very healthy way.
Okay. The management company who will run the building, is that under you guys?
That's correct.
It's your management company?
That's correct.
Okay.
It's in-house management.
Got it.
We don't sub out management. We also say, while I never like to use the word never, we're a generational builder. We're a privately held company. While there are occasions where projects get sold, this is a business like anything else, we generally hold our projects as a generational builder for the long term and manage them in-house for the long term. So you will be able to find me if you have an issue, because I stay personally involved with each of my projects, not just till final CO, but throughout, from a bigger picture perspective. But the communities that I've developed in, I maintain a rapport with that community well beyond final CO.
Understood. And you guys, I think you said were based in, was it Summit?
Short Hills.
Short Hills.
Correct.
So, and I appreciate the reference to Fair Lawn because it's close to us.
Yes.
So for this scale project, so call it somewhere around 100 units,
Yes.
I think you were saying that was kind of the minimum you would do, or your sweet
Yeah, that's
spot?
usually, that's right.
Okay.
And larger.
Got it. Have you done anything in and around, call it Summit, Chatham, Westfield? And I know you said something in Allendale. I'm not sure where that is, but are there any things that you guys have done, call it within the past 5 years, in any of those communities that you could talk about? Could you tell us?
I'm just curious, talk about in what perspective?
What are the names of them, I guess? And my follow-up question to that would be, you said you were targeting young professionals and empty nesters.
Yes.
So I go back to, even in Fair Lawn, we can talk about as well. What were your expectations, I guess? Was it going to be 50% young professionals and 50% empty nesters? And who actually wound up renting the unit? So I'm making it up. Did families come in? Did you find it was definitely a swing towards, millennials? And I'm just curious on what you've seen in your experience in the past, call it even 3 years, as the market has changed.
I'll start locally. We have not seen a significant change in terms of the demographic that might be renting in this type of project. When you asked that question, we've built a variety of product types. In Summit, we did luxury townhomes. In Cranford, we built a project that is almost identical to this, that's at the train station in downtown Cranford. It's 116 or 118 total units. We are seeing a very similar demographic in each of these developments with less emphasis on young professionals. We're finding that it appears that young professionals are migrating back to the cities and not staying in the suburbs, and we're finding more of an emphasis on empty nesters. I will also say that a market that is often targeted is divorcees. Sometimes a husband who doesn't want to leave a community because his wife and children are living there and just needs an apartment in town, wants something high quality, wants an extra bedroom for the children when they visit or they share that experience. Yeah. So we're finding divorcees is something that in a rental scenario, because of the economics of a rental and not the permanent nature of purchasing something, divorcees become a player. We completed a project that is almost identical to this in Springfield, right at the Baltusrol Country Club, primarily all empty nesters. Very few because you're not accessible to a desirable downtown. It's a more suburban product. It's adjacent to an affluent country club. So you're finding a lot of empty nesters that belong to the club who live part of the year in warmer climates and are here during golf season. So that project is called Skyline Ridge that you see from Route 78 on the left side. It's a highly amenitized luxury project that is in Springfield. Riverfront is our project in Cranford that I just referred to, approximately 116 or 118 units, and also a commercial component. Fairlawn Promenade right here on 208, certainly a place that you can take a look at the level of amenities and welcome, as I've always done, to both the governing body and the planning board, welcome an advance notice, and we'd have a manager walk you through, take a look at things at any point.
For your rentals,
yes.
Do you normally go out and is it a one-year rental? Do you try to get only one-year rentals?
Correct. 12-month term, excuse me. 12-month term, 1 year rentals.
1 year
That's
rentals.
correct. Always
Okay.
1 year.
And does does the current occupant or tenant have a first right of refusal on when you say?
The law requires that we offer all occupants that are in good standing a renewal.
Okay.
Renewals depending on either the municipal, if they have any type of a rent control in place, or market conditions dictate what the rent might be on a renewal. Sometimes it remains flat, sometimes there's an increase, and in a rare occasion there's concessions that are given if the market isn't warranting.
Just a couple other questions, sorry. From a rental perspective, does the management company go out and lease those? Do you work with realtors? How does that
No. On the rental side?
On the rental side.
All of our leasing, I would say 90% of our leasing now is done online.
Mm-hmm.
We have a website, gardencommunities.com. I welcome you to take a look. All of it is automated. We rarely are even printing brochures anymore. We find that people are printing our PDFs right off of the website and are coming in and are signing applications either online or otherwise. So we're not in our rental portfolio utilizing any outside brokerage firms. The portfolios we're using the typical websites that you're seeing, forrent.com, rent.com, apartments.com, and our own website. We have a lot of search engine optimization in our website. We come up very high on every list in a community where someone puts in, rentals in Ridgewood, if we're so inclined.
I have another question, and I'm not sure who this is to, Chris. So let's just pretend there's 5 units that have gone unrented for a year. I'm going to make this up. Are they allowed to sub those out to like an Airbnb or things like that?
If there's an ordinance, I'm not sure if there's an ordinance.
Is there a village ordinance? We have an ordinance.
Remember that.
We do? Okay.
Yeah, an Airbnb is usually an owner of an individual condominium that would be renting his unit.
I'm just asking.
Yeah, in this
the
instance,
world's changing, and
yeah, we're not utilizing any of those pseudo hotel or overnight services. We don't need to. Our portfolio is currently about 97% plus occupied, which in most investors' eyes is 100% occupancy because there's always a 3 to 5% occupancy factor, vacancy factor considered.
So you don't see us competing with the Fairlawn property. What are your rentals there in Fairlawn run for a 1-bedroom and a 2-bedroom?
Our 1-bedroom start at $2,000 a month.
Okay.
And we do have 2 and 3 bedrooms there that go up to almost $4,000 a month.
Okay. And have you figured out what the rentals would be in Ridgewood based on
and if, I know the market can change,
The
but,
market does change. We have a range, but we'll be analyzing that right up until a week before we open
so would you
for...
expect those being in and around the same ballpark?
Yes, probably slightly higher, depending on the unit and the square footage. Slightly higher than those numbers.
Okay, great.
Debbie raised a quick question. Corporate relocation around here is kind of popular, as you know.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first.
Corporate relocation?
Corporate relocation.
All throughout the area, I mean, or Allendale, Mawa, Ramsey, wherever. Anything like that where there's a relationship of like, just making this up, the Montville, Mercedes or something, if they have a corporate relationship that they keep a couple apartments and their businessmen come over and they stay for a year with their families or whatever?
We haven't entered into any type of those arrangements in the past. They might become more and more prevalent in the future. I will say on the for sale side, we utilize, the national firms that Weichert, Coldwell Banker, with regard to their corporate relocation, are generally bringing us buyers.
Generally it's condos, right?
Yes, it's more in the condo market. On the rental side, any of those services could simply go online and of course try and collect a fee from the prospective renter. We're not paying outside fees to those services. They just don't need to.
Right. Thanks.
Can I just ask a quick question about the Allendale property?
Certainly.
I'm sorry to interrupt anybody down here. Who ended up, you'd said in, I think you said Cranford, that you ended up more with empty nesters.
Yes.
And so who ended up in the Allendale?
So Allendale is a townhome for sale community.
Okay, totally
so it's
different.
a little different.
Okay.
Price points there were, it's a gated community, units that range, they're individual units, they're townhomes.
I wouldn't even put them in the
condo
same.
flats, so it's very difficult to put it in perspective. Allendale also a very good regional school system, but it's really hard to put in perspective. We have more families there because those, the townhome today has become more of the starter home.
Did you not find in Fairlawn it was a lot of families as well?
No, we have very few school-age children. Do I know a number off the top of my head? I don't, but I can tell you that the school bus does not even enter the property in Fairlawn with 150 units. There are very few, and when I say very few, it's probably with 150 units there. I would say there might be 10 to 12, and they're not full-time residents. They're often the, I don't want to say victims, that's not fair. They're often the result is the right word. They're often the result of divorce as opposed to the victim. I hope they're not victims.
That might not.
We're far off field, but...
I got where you were going.
You're a tie.
It was awesome.
I recollect the project in Fairlawn was rented 3 years ago. At that time, we were surprised by the number of Ridgewood residents that went there. Do you know how that ended up?
We have quite a few Ridgewood residents in the Fairlawn project. Can I quantify it? No, but our management reminded me, our managers, and again, there was a reference to third-party management. It's not third-party management. The managers work directly for me, work directly for our organization. There are a good number of Ridgewood residents. They are primarily empty nesters who sold large homes. They took some of our larger units, and they said it's as close as they can be to Ridgewood since the product isn't currently available for them in town. So, but they're happy residents in Fairlawn now.
Do you think they prefer a condo? Sorry. It's hard to say, right?
We really should try to go back to the site plan.
I know, I just obviously have an agenda.
Selling units up here.
Yeah, exactly.
Mr. Lovato, thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to ask you a question. You spoke about those green areas.
Green areas, yes.
And this is more of an architectural concern. What is the distance between from one unit to the other? Like if you were at the window.
Across the amenity deck?
Across, yeah.
I can look exactly. I think I said in the 40 to 50 foot range. I'm not sure if there's a dimension on here, but I can see my parking spaces, so let's call it. Yeah, that's about 50 feet. If
50
you're
feet.
interested, I have an exhibit that was presented by the architect as to what those amenity decks look like. I only have one, but if you wanted to pass it along, just to get a sense of what an amenity deck looks like. And in fact, it's in a project that is built locally in Cranford. I can grab it if you'd like to see it.
Certainly, if it's available. Yeah. And can I continue with relative to that as you look for it? So I'm concerned about privacy, and I'm concerned about the 50 feet. I feel a little bit more confident because it's 50 feet. However, what if there's something going on in there, and these people are right there, and I'm talking in terms about noise and concern, if anybody's using the green area for for a party.
I can tell you it hasn't been an issue in the past. We have rules and regulations in place regarding noise, regarding what can be done. There's no ball playing, there's no loud music. We set hours, and then those amenity decks have access cards that residents are given, and those access cards don't operate after a certain hour, so they can't go out onto the amenity deck overnight. We have not. Our amenity decks are pretty consistent with what we've done in other projects in terms of the distance between buildings. And as I think I tried to describe, each of those units will have its own small private balcony or terrace at the ground level. There then will be a screen. It's usually an aluminum rail and a small bedding of landscaping. That's usually only around 4 foot in height, but it creates that barrier between the private balcony and the rest of the amenity deck. And 50 feet is certainly not an issue at all in terms of any issues regarding violations of anyone's privacy
Because I was also
rights.
concerned about light coming down. As you go higher, the floors below become a little darker.
Yeah, the amenity decks are generally lit with architectural lighting that's low to the ground. That's just dealing with there's raised planters that some have some access lighting on those planters, but most of the amenity decks have very low landscape lighting, low voltage landscape lighting that's just providing a level of safety. And as I said, they're not open late at night, so it's really not a matter, in the summer months, you have light until 8:30. There's some very limited decorative lighting that just provides for safety on those decks, but nothing that's going to be an issue.
Okay, that's fine. And you said you have another project that's very similar to this one. So have you included those areas in those projects?
Say that again, did we?
You mentioned that you have built another project that's very similar to this one.
Yes, I'm going to show you that picture.
That's the one you were talking about.
But I'm having trouble multitasking at the very moment, but here it is.
And that's working well in terms of that space.
The spaces are very well received and have been...
Yes. A6. The Cranford? Andy, that's the Cranford, the courtyard photo?
Oh, I see.
Okay, thanks.
Lovely. Yeah, nice to see it.
Yeah, you could pass it down. I only have one. I didn't
We'll go this way first? That's lovely.
And that is an actual photograph of our project in Cranford, which is located on South Street, directly across from the Cranford train station. There's a commercial component in the front where we have Starbucks and a number of retail and restaurant tenants, and then behind it is the 116 or so units. They happen to follow the same architecture, the Tudor architecture we utilized in Cranford, if you can see in those.
How tall is this one? Do you happen to know?
The overall height?
If you even guess.
It's 3 and 4 stories over parking, so it's the same as this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else?
No, that was it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Joel, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Okay. How many years have you been with Garden Homes?
I'm almost embarrassed to say I'll be celebrating my 25th anniversary. I'm an attorney by trade, and I did start as an in-house attorney and transitioned over the development business. But I will be there 25 years in September. Okay. And I'm only 27.
Well, that's the answer I wanted to hear. I didn't want to hear you were there for 2 years.
You must be Italian.
Exactly. But almost 25 years. So over 20 years on the development side and about 5 years handling what Tom's doing, land use and transactional real estate.
Okay.
You guys must have.
And what are the lease terms you would offer? Is it only a year?
Correct. Only 1-year terms that are all renewable.
Any exceptions? Do you ever do a shorter lease for anybody?
No. We don't. We don't do short-term. The only time that you have an opportunity to do a shorter term is if you've already been there for a 12-month period for 1 year. You have an option of signing a short-term rider, and you pay for that rider for the privilege of having a 90-day period, let's say if you're in transition and about to move, but not shorter, no short-term rentals at all. 12 months is the minimum term.
Okay. And the Fairlawn project, is that fully rented?
Fully rented, correct. We've had virtually no vacancies, and where we've had a vacancy because it is the business of rentals, and people are there often because they're in a transitional time, and it's transient housing to a certain extent. I say that positively, not negatively. All of any vacancy we've had has been rented within a 2-week period, so we maintain just about 100% occupancy at all times.
All right. John, did you have any questions for Mr. Leventhal? Chris, did you have any questions?
None, thank you.
Beth, did you have any questions?
I have no questions.
Okay.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
So are these the balconies that you're proposing for this project? Is this similar?
It just doesn't look like a balcony.
Right, so you have, these are only French balconies.
Right, I know, that's what I would have said.
The ground level is what I was referring to, where you see that they actually have a private balcony that's then separated by landscaping.
Okay, understood.
These particular units, you're not seeing it, there's only some Juliet or French
Right,
balconies.
Juliet, right, I got it, okay.
Yeah, they just don't go.
And then what is, just out of curiosity, what is the width of that open?
That's also approximately 45 feet, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, really?
So each level would have its own balcony, not front, in the Dayton, it would have its own balcony?
Each unit we're proposing in our project to have its own balcony. There may be other windows where they're cornered units that we are proposing in our elevations. Some of those Juliet or French balconies, they're more decorative. But every unit that we're proposing does have its own balcony, correct? Or if they're on the ground floor, meaning on that amenity deck, it's a patio.
And how big is the deck on the balcony? About 4 feet, 6 feet, I forget.
They're about 4 feet wide, and then usually about 8 to 10, 12 foot. You usually can put a 32-inch circumference table with 2 or 4 chairs.
Understood.
So there's room for people to utilize those for passive recreation.
Scott, do you allow pets in your building?
So that's a good question. We haven't decided whether we will allow pets here. We've gone back and forth based on the market. In Fair Lawn, I split the difference, and one building is pet-friendly, and one building is no pets. So we kind of hedged our bets there. Fair Lawn, we only have, I think, about 6 dogs and a handful of cats in the 150 units, and we only allow them, as I said, in the one building.
Got it.
We're not sure what we would do here yet. We'd really, what we'll probably do, we would do about 6 months before we do a kind of a peer group where we solicit prospective renters and we try and take their temperature. The trend is being pet-friendly, and it gives us a revenue source as well because most of the competitors, and we are charging for a pet because of issues associated with damage that they may do and things like that, so they're charges.
I have one other question. As a general rule of thumb, do you keep X percent of net revenues for improvements to buildings and things like that?
Yes, there's a reserve that's kept on each project. So each of our projects are single asset entities. Every project is run independently of one another. We take an internal management fee. We charge back our expenses to each project individually, and then we do have a reserve that's put aside for capital improvements as needed.
All right, we're going to open it up to the public. Does anyone from the public have questions for Mr. Leventhal? Okay. Okay, state your name, address, spell your last name.
Lorraine Reynolds, 550 Windermere Avenue. Just a quick question. The one apartment complex in Cranford that you said is similar to this, do you know, you may have said it, but I didn't hear, do you know what the percentages of empty nesters and millennials or families are in that one?
I don't know specifically, but I think it's very consistent with what I've suggested most of our new projects in these suburban communities in New Jersey have been made up of, which is a rather small percentage of families. The second category would be singles and young couples, young professionals, and the more predominant is empty nesters. In fact, we're finding, and this is not a suggestion as it relates to this application, that there is significant room in the market because of our aging population for all age-restricted projects. We have several rentals communities that are all age-restricted, which you didn't see many years ago. And that's because we're not finding that we're losing much of market share because there are not significant numbers of young people that are living in these developments. In the suburbs. Today the trend is that most of those young professionals are finding their way back to the larger cities, because that's where the vibrancy is.
Right. And are you finding that either category, either the empty nesters or the young professionals, if there's 2 people in the apartment, do either the older people or the younger people tend to have 2 cars?
It depends. I can only answer that by suggesting to you that we comply with RSIS in each of our projects, and by complying with RSIS, I'm not aware of any parking issues that exist. Cranford is a perfect example because their downtown has some of the same challenges that Ridgewood's downtown has. We have a same parking count. We're meeting RSIS at approximately 2.0, despite their being directly across from the rail, where there are suggestions that waivers are acceptable from RSIS, that you could go down to 1.2. We still have, don't quote me, but approximately 2.0. We might have between 1.8 and 2.0, all having to park on site because the municipal parking is very challenging, and we don't have any issues.
Okay.
So whether it's one or two cars, and what ends up happening, because we assign and you register your car with us as the owner and manager of the complex, we don't lead to the parking problems that you might think exist, because we're limiting those number of registered automobiles to that unit. We're not allowing more than 2 vehicles to be registered for a particular unit. So we kind of control.
Even if somebody
Yes.
had a 25-year-old move back in with them, they can't bring it, they can't have a third
there
car.
may be occasions by which, but our general rule is that a unit is only, we're reserving that space, those spaces, those vehicles are registered for that unit, 1 or 2 spaces, and that's generally, yes, there are unassigned spaces on site, and I'm not going to suggest to you that there isn't an occasion where, yes, that third person, the child comes home from college and he's there for the summer or moves back in, that there might be an additional car. That certainly can, all I can suggest to you is that we don't have parking issues where we're complying with RSIS in very similar conditions.
All right, thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, state your name and address and spell your last name.
Dana Glazer, GLAZER, 61 Clinton Avenue. According to NorthJersey.com, Garden Homes paid $225,000 in federal fines to preserve more than 100 acres of land to compensate for its alleged failure to prevent stormwater from flowing off 10 construction sites, including residential developments in Elmwood Park, Rivervale, and Allendale. Can you comment on this as how this might relate or not to what's going on here?
I can only comment that you're reading an article. That's fine. I can comment that we can do and will comply with all environmental regulations. What you're reading is something that there was an enforcement action as it relates to many high-profile developers by the EPA in New Jersey. It was primarily record-keeping, so what you read in the paper doesn't necessarily mean that that's what the enforcement action actually is substantively about. And that as it relates to this project and any project that we built, we meet and exceed all environmental regulations, including discharge of stormwater.
So did you end up paying out $200,000?
We did. We settled and entered into a consent decree, and our record keeping is now where the EPA would like it to be.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Okay. All right. Being there are no further questions, I guess we're at a point that we'll end the application right now, and I guess...
Well, I'm sorry, Richard. We're going to ask John some questions at some point.
May I make a suggestion?
Yes.
Since we're very close to the end, and the only thing you have to do is your 2 witnesses, and they're pretty covered, why don't we get that done?
Well, Mr. Wells, it's about 10 after 10. I do have to speak with the board, nothing to do with this application, but an executive session issue. I believe there are 3 professionals, and quite frankly, I think you are going to sum up. And I wanted opportunity. I told Andrew as well, I wasn't told that it was going to be summation, so I needed an opportunity to prepare the board, what I usually do for submissions to the board before I vote.
I mean, you got another date for June 20th. I mean, if the board experts are short...
I understand that and ask for that date so that we could be prepared to do that.
Yeah.
I'm just suggesting that for continuity, and it's not that late in the evening, I suspect, for example, Mr. Jar is basically done. I think he even indicated that he won't have to come back another night if you just spend another few minutes and finish him up.
Is your proposal that you sum up and there's board discussion and a vote on the other date, or after these people testify tonight?
Yes,
or?
yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And I understand your concern about wanting to be able to legally instruct them and so forth. Although we have accommodated the fact that we've extended this application many, many times. We can do it one more time in order to get us to the end. I'm just saying efficiency right now, at least Mr. Jar, who's basically done, I think we should finish. That's what I'm suggesting. Thanks.
Well, I don't think John's done yet. I have a couple questions for him.
What's that? Well, if we go break, then it's going to just be...
You want to take a break? Phil wants to.
Yeah, she needs a break. Just take a break.
All right, we'll take a 5-minute break.
Okay.
questions, I guess, Chair.
Okay, you want to just give us the benefit of any other additional direct that you have with respect to this development application?
I believe I covered it previously in my testimony, that all of my concerns have been resolved at this point in writing or through testimony by the applicant. And I think at this point, I'd like to open myself to questions to the board to help with any clarifications or concerns.
Okay, sure. All right, Dave, we'll start with you. Do you have any questions for Mr. Jar?
You're satisfied that the tandem parking is not truly an issue?
Tandem parking is not my favorite kind of parking. I don't see it operating very differently than what the traffic engineer testified, though. It's very similar to what works at my single-family house and most others. Do I try not to have it? Yes. Do I think the applicant probably tried not to have it? I think that's so too. It does appear to me that it will work just like the other spaces. It's just an inconvenience for those people who have to, be behind one another. So I do think that I don't see a safety issue with it because it's going to operate like the other parking spaces in the area. So I see an inconvenience for the owners. And I think that they're probably going to park in other spaces that might be empty, but I think it'll be safe.
Do you see any problem with the tandem parking at the end of an aisle where there's only one direction that the vehicles can exit from the tandem parking?
I see it operating just like any other parking space at the end of an aisle. So I don't see it. I don't see that being very different than any other parking space at the end of an aisle. It's always nice not to have a space at the end of the aisle and to have some, where you stripe it off, or that's where they put like a green island or something. I'm sure you see that in commercial lots a lot. Not really an option here in this case.
That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Councilman Boyd?
John, can you opine on the consideration of a garage being built on Hudson Street and how that might affect this development and the traffic flow in that area? I know that we had talked in some preliminary way about changing some of the exits from the Hudson Street garage, going up Hudson Street, and then taking a left on South Broad to get out during the evening. How would a garage in that area affect this particular development?
There is no question that should the village consider and someday hopefully erect a garage at Hudson Street, that there will be an effect on South Broad and Hudson Street and Passaic Street as a system. The driveways at this development operate at very high levels of service. So even with the addition of the garage, I don't anticipate seeing their driveway levels of service having much of a change. However, I do feel that, if we do put the garage there will be a preponderance of more traffic in the area. So I think that the improvements which the developer has offered to put forward, and by way of, sidewalk improvements and widening and handicap ramps and crosswalk striping and whatnot, will definitely help to mitigate at least their impacts and their negative effect on what could be a potentially very good project for the village at some point in the future.
So from the sidewalk standpoint, that includes ADA compliance with the kind of the ramps on the sidewalks as well. Is that correct? I think you put that in your report.
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I have no questions.
Okay. Francis?
I have no questions, thank you.
Melanie?
I think at the moment, I'm comfortable, unless do you have any other outstanding concerns that you would address to us to take just a better look at or a closer look at as we deliberate here?
Well, I think I went over those in my report.
In your report,
yeah,
I would anything from tonight.
I would say that That's a very open question, and I would like to answer it by saying the report I did for both the Chestnut Village and for this are very similar in regards to my feelings about the need for the village to seriously consider some updates to the ordinance that include requiring sidewalks and certain other pedestrian improvements and focusing more on necessarily, actually kind of the opposite of your discussion before about widening the street. I'd like to see us widen the sidewalks. I'd like to see us...
I think that's in there as well, some of it.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm really in favor of us capitalizing on our train station and seeing it used to its best potential and best fulfillment for the improvement of Ridgewood, and therefore creating safe pedestrian routes and more. If you make it easier for people to walk back and forth, it's still nobody wants to get out of their car. But if you at least do your share. All right, we're doing the best we can to try and encourage people not to take the car and to, get out, put the umbrella, and make the trek to the train station. And I know, how many moms have to, I'm the dad that always had to drive my son to school. I'm sorry, I just had to do it. So I get that. So, but my recommendation would be to please continue to be pragmatic. Please continue to be mindful of the fact that although I agree with Mr. DeSerio that the traffic generated by this development is not significant, that NJDOT has defined that for us. We know what that is. I will say, though, in Ridgewood, our cup is full, and just that more drop that was perfect. That one more drop is what your concerns are. That's what you are saying, John. We have these traffic issues, and that's because the cup's already full. So just the one more drop is making it overflow and creating additional concern for everyone here. So let's continue to do our best to keep them, widen the sidewalks, keep the traffic volumes down, and do our best to do better planning moving forward.
Thank you.
Okay, Debbie?
No questions.
Isabella?
No questions.
Joel?
No questions.
Okay, I have no questions.
I actually have another question.
Sure.
Sorry. So, John, it actually goes to the councilman's question. As you know, you and I walked down this area a couple of weeks ago with our planner, with Beth. And the observation was that there were a number of driveway openings, cutouts on the existing site, and that prevented parking along that west side of Broad Street.
Yes.
And so there was a moment when we realized, or I had realized, that when this development happens, there'll only be two entrances, exits, and so just two driveways, and that allows us the opportunity to possibly add more parking on the street. So, again, to Councilman Boyd's question, what would happen, even though it has nothing to do in the sense of your report, what would happen if we added 20 additional spaces to the street there?
Well, it's something to consider. I'm not sure how those spaces would get used. In fact, it's something that we should look at. I believe that right now the proposal is that there be no parking posted along the entire frontage of this project. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so my understanding is right now, I think that what we can look at as the project develops and we see how their parking is, if in fact they have the surplus, which we predict they will have, then maybe allowing parking there for the other businesses on Hudson and, possibly other local community users, for example, the church or the nearby schools, might be something we can consider.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no other questions from the board? Mr. Wells? Okay, is there anyone from the public that has questions for Mr. Jar?
Public left.
Okay. All right, seeing there none, so I guess we're finished with Mr. Jar, and we're going to continue this application without further notice to June 20th, 2017.
Can I just ask for clarification? It's the intention of the board that Mrs. McManus and Mr. Rosenhauser would also testify on behalf of the village?
Yep, that would be the intention, and then there could be public testimony if people show up for it and want to testify. And then it would close it and then have public comment, and then you can make a summation for it. Yep.
I'm terribly sorry, but knowing that this meeting is going to be carried to June 20th, I just checked my calendar.
Okay.
I have a conflict that evening.
Okay.
Perhaps if the board were so inclined, I could give a little bit of testimony tonight so as to avoid having to send somebody in my place.
Okay.
I'm sorry to throw this
Okay.
this item out at the last minute.
Let's see, it's 10. Do you know how long your testimony would be? Or?
I don't anticipate it would be long because, quite frankly, I had few comments in my report, and the applicant has already addressed a few of them. And of course, if the board would like me to send somebody in my place, I'm happy to do so. But there might be an opportunity to address the majority or perhaps all of them this evening.
Mr. Wills, I happen to think that Ms. McManus should testify tonight.
I do too.
And also, I think someone else should come that day as well, Ms.
Back on the 20th.
Yeah.
We understand that the board isn't ready to conclude this evening, so we'll come back on the 20th. But I think if we can take a couple more minutes, I think we can get it done.
Just highlights, go ahead.
Okay. All right. I will try to be brief in my comments this evening.
I don't know if I swore you in on this one yet.
I don't think so,
Raise your right
actually.
hand, you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
And just for the record, state your full name and your business address.
My name is Elizabeth McManus. I'm a planner with Clark Gate and Hints, planner for the board. My business address is 100 Barrack Street, Trenton, New Jersey, 08608.
So stipulate to professional planner expert?
I will.
Thank you. Go ahead,
Okay.
Mr. McManus.
So I issued a report on March 30th, 2017 for this application. There are two sections that I'd like to highlight for comments this evening. The first section is item 2.4, and I should also add that the applicant provided in new stipulations for my report in the exhibits that were handed out this evening. All of these items were addressed to some extent, but I want to go through those with the applicant. So the first item is item 2.4 in my report on page 2. It states that the village's ordinance requires that parking shall be screened with in accordance with Section 190-118.3E10D, if parking is proposed under the building, as it is, shall be screened with architectural elements consistent with the building materials. I know that the applicant previously provided testimony during one of the hearings, which was pointed out in the stipulations. The comment is really that although the testimony was may have been provided, of course, there's no images provided in the testimony. Okay.
There actually was.
I didn't have those exhibits.
Right, the full set of site plans on sheet A-2.1, rear, right, and left side elevations are shown with the proposed detail for the screening. So that's the full set of plans that's already in exhibit.
And Mr. Wells, what number is that exhibit?
Oh,
No.
A3. A-3, thank you.
Okay.
The architectural detail is decorative aluminum rails that we utilize. They may also be seen in some of the rendered photos that are exhibits as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm happy to answer any questions, but quite frankly, I was simply looking for an opportunity to review that exhibit. The applicant has provided that at this point, so I can take a look. If I have any further questions, I'll alert the board prior to your June 20th meeting on that item.
Okay.
The next section I'd like to address in my report is section 4, beginning on page 6. And this is my general commentary section. And as I said when I first opened up my comments, is a number of these items have been addressed. Item 4.1 requested additional information on how those exterior amenity areas would be accessed. The applicant has indicated through testimony at various points this evening that those amenity areas will be accessed from the first floor, and so there will be a balcony for each residence has a balcony, and then there's also common area access to these amenity areas. And so that comment, my question has been satisfied. Item 4.2, we requested some amendments to the plant material. The applicant has indicated that they'll comply, so I have no further comments on that item. Item 4.3 is additional commentary on the architecture, simply providing some guidance to the board if you're so inclined to provide to ask additional questions about the height of the building and how its appearance could be mitigated. And last item is 4.4, addressed testimony on noise, was looking for additional information, and the applicant provided that during their testimony earlier this evening. So with those 5 comments throughout this report, those were the only additional items I had wanted to raise beyond what your previous planner had done in his report. So with that, that concludes my testimony, but of course I'm available for questions from the board or public.
Okay, Dave, did you have any questions? Jeff? So you say the architecture perception of height could be reduced or elimination of unnecessary dormers. How does the applicant feel about that?
I don't want to put words in the applicant's mouth.
Yes.
Mr. Lowenthal can elaborate, but my point was that Mr. Appel did actually address all of that issue, and a relevant point is we are conforming to height. What she's doing is making a suggestion, her aesthetic suggestion on how it could appear to be less. Mr. Appel testified, it's been a while, but I think even this board remembers extensively on how he had worked to accomplish that, and we stand with his testimony.
Okay, so you're reluctant to consider that. Is that kind of the general? Yeah, okay. All right.
If there were any suggestions that she'd had, I certainly would review them with the architect, but we think that from an architectural perspective that the site, the height perception balances with the architectural style. But we would certainly listen, and if she marked up a set of plans, I'd bring it back to the architect, and there might be some suggestions we would implement.
If you look at the project, there's practically no project anywhere that's made more effort to try to create different sight lines and so forth in terms of working on that height issue. So
okay,
we think we've got it done.
Fair enough. Thank you. And Mayor Knudsen?
Yeah, so I am hung up on that tandem parking, but just to go through that design piece, do you want to just walk through that 190, I think it's 90C, is that what you...
Oh, on the tandem parking item? Mayor, do you mean the compliance issues associated with tandem parking? Is that your...
The code that you cited is 190, 90C, which
yes.
is unobstructed at all times?
Yeah, it requires all parking areas and structures to have, I can provide a quote if necessary, but it essentially requires that all parking spaces have unobstructed access at all times. And so that is the municipality's ordinance that although it doesn't specifically address tandem parking, it doesn't say those words, but that requirement conflicts with, appears to conflict with the tandem parking in that the first space, the parked-in parking space, so to speak, does not have that unobstructed access because, of course, it's surrounded on all sides by parking or perhaps the parking structure.
Which is why we've added for an exception to the site plan ordinance.
Okay. Okay, no other questions, thank you.
Okay. Francis?
I don't have any questions for you, thank you.
Melanie?
I'm okay for now, thank you.
Debbie?
No questions.
Isabella?
No questions.
Joel?
No questions.
I have no questions either. Applicant have any questions? Anyone from the public have questions? Okay, that finishes.
Officially done.
Yeah.
Go on vacation.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that.
All right, so this application will be carried to June 20th, 2017 without further notice and the consent of the applicant, I assume?
And no prejudice to the board.
And no prejudice to the board. Okay, thank you, Mr. Wells, and thank you for being organized. I like how you present them.
See you on June 20th. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, our next item will be adoption of minutes. We have the minutes of June 7, 2016 and June 21, 2016 to review and approve. For June 7, 2016, I guess Mayor Knudsen and myself are the only two available old war horses that can review this.
War horses, speak for yourself.
All right. Mayor Knudsen, have you reviewed it?
Yes, I have, and I'm just looking for them on my... Yeah, I did review everything. So, which date are we on first?
June 7.
Oh, yeah, okay, great, there. Okay, so, just go. I will make a motion to accept the June 7th, 2016 minutes as submitted.
Okay, and I second that motion. Michael, call the roll.
Mayor Newton,
Yes.
Mr. Joel.
Yes. Okay, the June 7, 2016 minutes are approved as written. The next minutes are the June 21, 2016. And the people available for this one is Mayor Knutson, myself, and Isabella Altano.
Actually, I was still on my leave of absence at the time.
Were you on June 21st? Okay. And I noticed that it didn't indicate that Debbie was there or not. And I think.
Yeah, and I think I was at the other meeting too. I don't think I missed either of those meetings in June. But
Yeah, so this was actually, that was the
Is Church of God, do you remember that?
Church of God.
I remember the Church of God too, but it was at a different time.
Yeah.
yes.
And this was actually when a whole bunch of folks came from about the Route 17 proposed housing element. So who was here for sure?
I was here.
You were here. So we need to correct add Debbie to the...
Okay.
And Isabella, you were here?
I was still on leave of absence.
Okay.
So Isabella wasn't here.
All right, so I guess
So
with the...
Patia replaces Altano.
So I guess Ed and Debbie, and then
Okay.
making Isabel
So I'll make
absent, and then confirming, checking the records on it, just to double confirm.
Yeah, I'm going to go back and check my calendar too.
Yeah, but subject to those corrections.
Okay, so I'll, after I slip my elbow, I'll make a motion to adopt the June 21st, 2016 minutes, subject to the calendar check and change for Deborah Patiri and Isabella, for sure you weren't here, right? So subject to those changes.
Okay, and I second that. And we'll take the vote. We'll include Debbie on it, but I guess if you aren't here, then it would just be...
Yeah, I think I was at the one before, because I read both sets of notes, and I think I was at the one before, and that one I wasn't at.
Okay.
So we'll just do me and Richard for now, I guess.
Okay, call the roll. Michael?
Mayor Newton,
Yes.
Mr.
It would just be me.
Mr. Joel.
Yes.
Oh, look at this, the board deliberations. Mr. Joel, motion to approve the report, and I seconded it on that same night.
And I guess just for the June
I guess you're
7th,
the only ones there
just
that
double
night.
check on that, because Debbie has a little different recollection.
That's funny.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, we're good?
Okay, for other business, I guess everyone received those financial disclosures, and you should file them. The village clerk sent them.
Right.
They look like they fall low on the to-do list, but it's not that painful if you go online and do them.
And they're not enforcing that, just for everyone knows.
Yeah.
Please do it ASAP, but
An extra
they
month.
actually have an extra month on
There's a
it.
penalty if you don't.
Yeah, it's a hefty fine to pay towards us.
Yesterday.
Okay, the next item would be executive session.
I'm sorry, I hope that TV, is that TV still
Do I have a
on?
motion to move into executive session?
How do we shut the television off?
Current litigation issue?
Okay, is anyone making the motion? Motion.
Motion.
Okay.
Who shuts the
All
TV off?
right, Councilman Voight
Probably walk inside.
made the motion, Joel Torrielli seconded it. Michael, call the roll.
Mayor Newton,
Oh, I'm sorry, what was the
This is
question?
for executive.
Yes, we're good. Okay.
Councilman Voight,
Yes.
Mr. Torrielli.
Yes.
Ms. McWilliams,
Yes.
Mr. Schreibner.
Yes.
Mr. Joel,
Yes.
Ms. Altano,
Yes.
Ms. Patiri,
Yes.
Ms. Bartow.
Yes.
Okay, the motion is approved to move into executive session. I'll just read the resolution, and then we can go into executive session. Whereas the Open Public Meetings Act, NJSA 10:4-6 et sec, permits the exclusion of the public from a portion of a meeting in certain circumstances, and whereas this board is of the opinion that such circumstances presently exist, now therefore be it resolved by the Planning Board of the Village of Ridgewood, County of Bergen, State of New Jersey, that the board conduct a closed session from which the public shall be excluded for the purpose of discussing pending and/or anticipated litigation or matters falling within the attorney-client privilege where confidentiality is required for the attorney to exercise his ethical duties as a lawyer and/or retention of professionals. and that such discussion be made available to the public as soon as possible following the decision of the board to release same if and when appropriate, and that this resolution shall take effect immediately. Okay, we're going into executive session.